Chapter 1. Jessamine glanced up from the book she was reading, sitting in the garden of Madame Wig's foundling home and school. As usual, she was alone. How she was going to travel across the country and marry a stranger, she didn't know, but she'd already sent a letter to Mr. Robert Samuels in Nowhere, Texas. She wasn't sure what she'd hear back, but she hoped he would accept her. He seemed like a good man from his ad, and she wanted to be married to a good man. Her goal was to start a school in Nowhere, so she could get the grant money Wiggy had offered them, and help spread Wiggy's ideas of modern education and inclusion for everyone. She hoped that Nowhere didn't yet have a school, but if they didn't, there would be more work for her. She didn't mind hard work. She hoped the parents in Nowhere didn't mind an education heavy on literature and lacking in the maths and sciences. Math had always hurt her head, and as for science, Jessie gave a delicate shudder. Who liked science anyway? It was just a waste of time in her opinion. Why bother learning it when they could spend those hours lost in the works of Shakespeare? One of the other girls was headed toward her, a letter in hand. "You have mail, Jessamine." No one knew she preferred to be called Jessie because she was someone who spent most of her time alone. Most of the other girls had been in the school since infancy, but Jessie had gotten there as a young teenager, already feeling like an outsider. "Thank you, Tilly." Tilly nodded. "Is that the letter from your potential groom?" Since Jessamine had never gotten a letter in the time she'd been at the orphanage, she assumed it was. "I believe so. We'll see if he wants me." Tilly sat down beside Jessie, looking interested. "I want to know what it says." "I'm a little afraid to know." Jessie turned the letter over and over in her hands, wondering if she was being accepted or rejected. When her parents had died in a fire, she'd been sent to her grandmother, who had died a month later. She'd then gone to an aunt who had refused to take in another mouth to feed. And then an uncle who had wanted nothing to do with her. It had taken 6 months for her to end up in the orphanage, and by then, she'd felt like she would never be loved again. Rejection had become a way of life, and one she didn't want to go through again. "Aren't you going to open it?" Tilly seemed impatient to know what it said. "I'm scared," Jessie said quietly. "Well, then give it to me, and I'll do it." Tilly snatched the letter back from her. "I'm assuming you want to know what it says after I know. Just tell me if he wants me or not." Jessie got up and walked over to a tree, not wanting anyone to see the fear on her face. It was enough to admit to herself that she was frightened. It was something else to allow others to see the very real emotion on her face. Tilly looked down at the letter, reading silently. After a moment, she grinned. "He sent you money and a train ticket. Sounds like he wants you." Jessie felt her heart plummet into her stomach. "He wants me?" It was hard to believe anyone would want her around. She was the orphan no one had ever wanted. Well, no one but Madame Wig, who accepted everyone. "He does. Get over here and take your letter and read it. No reason to be afraid now. Looks like you're going to Texas." Jessie took the letter from Tilly and read it silently to herself. The ticket was for 3 days hence, and she was going to be a bride in Texas. Who lived in Texas anyway? Was it still overrun in a war? She remembered there had been a war fought with Mexico, and she knew Texas had been on the side of the Confederacy during the war between the states. That's all she knew. Hopefully she could figure out more before the time came. Surely there was a book on Texas history in the library. Knowing all she could about her future home was important to her. "I guess I need to go pack." "Yes, you really do." Tilly smiled. "Do you want help?" Jessie considered for a moment before shaking her head. "No, I'll do it myself." She didn't relish the idea of anyone else going through her things. "All right. You have fun." Tilly wandered off in the direction she'd come from. Jessie got to her feet and headed to her room. It was going to take a lot of time and effort to get her belongings packed and ready to go. She hoped it would be enough time. Robert Samuels was waiting on her. On the day of her departure, Jessie sat on the side of her bed, looking about the room that had been her home for the 6 years she'd been in the orphanage. It looked bare because her roommate had departed before her. It seemed odd that she felt sad to leave when it hadn't been a terribly happy place for her. But no place had really been happy since her parents' death. As she stood and gathered her things to leave for the train station, there was a knock on the door before Madame Wig came in. "I have a wagon waiting to take you to the train station. Are you ready?" Jessie nodded. "I think so. I'm nervous, but I think that's a normal reaction to getting on a train to travel halfway across the country and marry a stranger." Wiggy nodded. "A very normal reaction." She held out a small package wrapped in brown paper. "Since you're leaving on your birthday, I thought a birthday going-away gift would be nice." Jessie took the package. "May I open it on the train?" "Yes, of course." Wiggy stepped forward and hugged Jessie, who felt strange. She wasn't someone who enjoyed physical touch a great deal. Or maybe it was that she was no longer used to it. "Thank you for the gift. I appreciate it. I hope you'll write to me when you arrive in Texas. I know you have never felt terribly comfortable here, but I've always cared about you." Jessie smiled, not believing the older woman, but appreciating her efforts. "Thank you, Wiggy. I'm grateful for the time and care you've always shown me." She tucked the package into her carpet bag she was taking on the train and moved aside as a man came into her room to carry her trunk out. "I will make certain I write you as soon as I arrive, so you know I'm safe." "Thank you." Wiggy looked at her with a sad look. "I do wish I'd known how to help you better." Jessie nodded. "You gave me everything I needed. Except love." She'd needed love. "I did. But I'm not sure you knew it." Wiggy watched her walk away, a sad look on her face. An hour later, Jessie was sitting on the train that would take her all the way to Chicago, where she would change trains for her trip to Texas. She was on a train bound for nowhere, and she couldn't help but feel a bit of excitement stirring in her stomach. A new place to go. A new person to love. She hoped things were better for her than they'd always been since the day her parents had died. As soon as the train started moving, she opened her carpet bag and found the gift Wiggy had pressed into her hands. She carefully untied the string and found a leather-bound journal with her name embossed on the front. Jessamine's journal. Yes, Madame Wig had known her better than she'd ever realized. Robert paced nervously back and forth in front of the train station in Nowhere. He was the barber in the small town, and he enjoyed a thriving business. Why, people from Bagley drove all the way to Nowhere to get their hair cut. He lived in a small apartment above his shop, and he knew he was ready for a wife and children. This Jessamine sounded like the person he needed in his life. He only hoped she'd be able to deal with his shyness. He was good around men, and the shop was always filled with laughter and fun, but around women, he was always a bit tongue-tied. The train would be there any minute, and he wasn't sure he was ready to meet her. Yes, he was dressed in his Sunday best, and his hair had been combed perfectly. He'd even trimmed it himself the night before. His mustache had been combed neatly as well. He took deep breaths, trying to settle his nerves. When the train pulled into the station, he watched for his young lady to step onto the platform. He saw an older couple he'd known his entire life, followed by a young man he didn't know at all. And then, looking like a vision in violet, a young woman stepped off the train. Her eyes going directly to him. His Jessamine. Her lips curled up at the corners, but it seemed like it took an effort for her to smile. She looked tired. He walked toward her, the flowers he'd picked clutched tightly in his hand. "Miss Stewart?" "Yes, I'm Jessamine Stewart." "Are you Robert Samuels?" He nodded, a shy smile on his lips. "Yes. It's nice to finally meet you. Do you have a trunk?" He looked around, too embarrassed to actually make conversation when it was easier to discuss the business at hand. He thrust the flowers toward her. "Oh, these are for you." Jessie looked at the drooping flowers he held out with a smile. They'd probably been clutched just a little too tightly, and they all wilted as a result. "Thank you. My wedding bouquet." She desperately wished there was a place for her to bathe before the ceremony, but he had given her to believe they would marry the minute she disembarked from the train. He looked everywhere but at her face. "Is there a trunk?" Yes, it should be with the other luggage. She walked to where 4 trunks were on the platform. That one is mine. She pointed at the one that was most scuffed, a little embarrassed. But she was an orphan. Surely he didn't expect her to have the nicest things. He lifted the trunk and carried it to his buggy, which was not far away. Thankfully, he wasn't exactly a strong man. Jessamine watched the small, wiry man who was about to be her husband, heft the trunk into the back of his buggy. He wasn't the man she'd always dreamed of marrying, and he didn't seem to talk much, but she couldn't picture him hurting her either. There was good in that. He turned to her and helped her into the carriage. I plan to go straight to the pastor. She nodded. That's fine. I'd rather we be married before we're alone together, so it makes perfect sense. As she said the words, she wondered how the other girls who were marrying were handling their first encounters with their husbands. It was awkward and strange to think she would be expected to share the man's bed that night. She couldn't imagine feeling like they were in love by then. Or even like they knew one another. He drove to the church, still unable to meet her eyes. He was baffled by her beauty. There was something truly special about the woman beside him, and he knew he would never be quite good enough for her. Hopefully she wouldn't regret agreeing to marry a small-town barber. She should have found herself a king. Her beauty was suited for royalty. He pulled up in front of the small church in town. I talked to the pastor, and you can use the church as a school if you wish. Oh, that's good. Inside her stomach was doing flips. She already had a school building. I would like to start the school as soon as possible. It's already October, and school shouldn't start so late in the year. All right. He couldn't believe how shy and tongue-tied he felt around her. He hoped she didn't plan to consummate the marriage that night because he was relatively certain it would be too much for him to attempt. He was too nervous around her. He helped her down from the buggy and led her into the church where Pastor Johnson was waiting for them. Pastor, thank you for meeting us here. Yes, of course, Bob. As long as I get my free haircut, I'm happy. Bob? She'd had no idea he was called Bob. Interesting. This is Jessamine, he said softly, blushing as he spoke her name. It's nice to meet you, Jessamine. Our community is happy to have a teacher. Jessie nodded. I'm happy to be here, she said softly. It was odd to be welcomed when she'd never been wanted anywhere. Maybe life here really would be different. Are you ready to get started? Pastor Johnson asked. My wife is holding lunch for me. Yes, of course, Bob said, clearing his throat. The wedding was fast, and before she knew what had happened, the pastor was pronouncing them husband and wife. You may kiss your bride. Bob turned to Jessamine, leaning down and quickly kissing her cheek. He wanted a real kiss, but he didn't want their first one to be in front of anyone. He would have to wait until later, probably much later. It was only a few minutes before they were on their way to the barber shop and his apartment above it. She recognized the striped pole and remembered what he'd told her he did for a living. We'll be living above the shop, she asked, looking at the building. He nodded. It's comfortable. The quarters would be tight, but surely that would be conducive to them feeling easy in each other's company very quickly. He wanted that for them. She looked up at the windows that looked down over the main street there in town. She hoped it was roomier than it looked, but either way, she'd make it work. She was there to be a good wife and to start a school. She could do both and do it happily. He led her to the apartment so she could explore, before going back down to the buggy to carry up her trunk. Jessie stood in the middle of the small parlor, looking around her. It wasn't huge, but it was big enough they wouldn't be tripping over one another all the time. She looked at the kitchen and saw there was a nice stove. She was pleased she wouldn't have to cook over the fireplace. That would make things easier. Why, there was even a pump at the kitchen sink. She wouldn't have to leave to get water, which would be very easy. She poked her head into a bedroom that was obviously his. The covers were thrown over the top of the bed, but the bed not truly made properly, and she saw that several of the drawers in his chest of drawers were empty for her, as well as half of the wardrobe. He had obviously worked hard to prepare for her arrival. She looked into another room and found a second bedroom. She wondered if she could possibly talk him into letting her sleep in there until they were more comfortable with one another. She had a feeling it wouldn't work, but it was always worth a try. She opened the last door and found a small bathroom. There was even a water closet. It would help a great deal for her not to have to run outside to use the outhouse in the middle of the night. Everything she needed was there. Bob walked back in with her trunk, a bit out of breath. "Do you have rocks in this thing?" "Books," she said, answering honestly. "Lots and lots of books." She hoped he didn't mind being married to a girl who read all the time, because there was no way she was changing her entire personality to suit him. He put the trunk into his bedroom, and she frowned, feeling as if that answered her question. He expected them to consummate the marriage immediately, whether she felt comfortable with him yet or not. "Your apartment is very nice," she said. "I wasn't expecting the bathroom, but that will make things so much better." "Yes, I had that put in when I decided to send for a mail-order bride. You have every right to all the comforts I can provide." He didn't meet her eyes as he spoke with her, and she couldn't help but wonder if he didn't like her enough to look directly at her. Had she already done something to offend him? "Well, your wife appreciates it a great deal." She opened her trunk and began the tedious process of folding her things and putting them into drawers. "While I unpack, maybe you can tell me about your food preferences? I'd love to be able to cook your favorite meals." He shrugged. "I always eat the special at the diner." "The diner? There's a restaurant in town?" "You don't expect to continue eating there now that you're married, do you?" she asked. "I wouldn't mind. I'm used to it. They might think I'm dead if I don't show up 3 times a day like clockwork." Jessie laughed softly. "Well, I hope you like my cooking enough that will no longer be necessary." "Me too." He couldn't imagine her cooking could be half as good as the diner's. Beautiful women couldn't cook, could they? No matter. He'd eat burnt food for every meal if it would make her happy. Chapter 2. Dear Journal. I have arrived in nowhere, Texas, and it is as the name sounds. In the middle of nowhere. I'm surprised a train comes here. I'm now a married woman, though that sounds so strange to me. My new husband goes by the name Bob, and he seems like a nice man. He doesn't act particularly thrilled that I came here to be his bride, but that is exactly what I expected. Why would things change now? I'm still the same Jessamine I was back in New York. I haven't suddenly become a wanted person just because I traveled halfway across the country. He took me out for supper this evening, but starting tomorrow, I will be cooking meals for him. He just doesn't know it yet. He thought we would continue eating at the diner in town for every meal, instead of his new wife cooking for him. I'm not sure why he thought that, but he seems to be a bit odd. Nice but odd. I hope to be able to start a school by November 1st, as that's the true reason I came here. I hope this marriage goes as it should. We will see how Bob feels about consummating the marriage. He has put my trunk in his bedroom, so he obviously wants me to share a room with him and not take the spare room. Hopefully he will give me time to get to know him before we take that step. When she had finished writing in her journal, Jessie quickly wrote a letter to Wiggy. She needed the older woman to know that everything was fine. She didn't want anything to make the head of the orphanage feel worse. No one was quite sure what was wrong with her, and many had suspicions she was making the whole thing up, but if it was heart-related, then Wiggy couldn't handle any more stress. After she'd finished her letter, she put it aside to mail the following day. Then she got up and found Bob in the parlor, reading a newspaper. "I'm going to take a bath. I'm not sure what time you usually go to bed." Bob blushed. "Not for another few hours. I'm not a farmer, so I don't keep farmer's hours. I have to be at work by 9. "Sounds good." She found her nightgown and carried it into the bathroom with her. It felt odd to know she would be wearing a nightgown in front of her new husband, but what could she do? Stranger or not, he was her husband, and she needed to show him the respect he deserved. She took a long bath, washing her hair and spending the time brushing it out before she ever left the bathroom. It felt good to be clean again after so many long days on a train. After her bath, Jessie went into the bedroom and pulled out one of the books she'd brought with her, lying on the bed to read it. She knew most people preferred to sit up and read, but if she was able, she always preferred to lie on her stomach. It made things so much more comfortable. She was still reading when Bob came into the bedroom. "Are you ready to sleep?" he asked. She put a bookmark into her book. "Yes, I'm ready." He turned down the lamp and undressed in the dark, slipping into the bed beside her. "Is it all right if I sleep on this side?" she asked softly. "It's fine." She waited for him to reach out for her, but he didn't. Instead they lay side by side on the bed, both of them on their backs and not touching. "What is a normal day like for you?" she asked. "I get up around 7 and stop by the diner for breakfast. Then I go to the shop and open by 9. I work until about noon and return to the diner for lunch. Then I work until 5 and head to the diner for supper." She frowned. "You know I'm planning on cooking meals for you, right? You could maybe keep doing lunch at the diner, but I'm happy to cook every other meal. And I'll even cook lunch until I start teaching. You can talk to the pastor about that on Sunday. He's more in touch with when everyone wants to start school." Bob suddenly realized how much easier it was to talk to her there in the dark. "Did you always live at the orphanage?" "No. My parents died when I was 13. I spent a year being pushed from family member to family member, and I finally ended up there at 14. It was a good place, but most of the girls had been there from infancy. I never quite fit in." "I'm sorry to hear that. I'm glad you're here now." "I am too," she said softly. "I'm looking forward to meeting my students and starting up my school." "What did you teach back in New York? Am I right that you said you were a teacher?" "Yes, I taught literature. I'm afraid I'm a bit of a bookworm. I'm not fond of math or science, but if you give me a book, I'll devour it. I enjoy teaching writing as well." "What about history?" he asked. He had always enjoyed history. "I find history much easier than the sciences, of course, but I still prefer made-up stories to non-fiction. It just makes me happy to lose myself in a world of someone else's imaginings." "Well, I'm sure the children in town will happily read anything you put in front of them. Has there ever been a school in town?" Jessie couldn't believe how easy it was to lie abed and talk to this man. All day she had tried to converse with him, and suddenly he was talking to her. She wasn't sure why it was different, but she was pleased that it was. "No. I was raised here in nowhere, but there weren't ever enough children for a school. My mother taught me at home." "That's nice." "My mother taught me at home before she died." Jessie rarely talked about her parents, but for some reason she felt comfortable talking to him about them. "How did they die?" Bob felt badly for her. His parents were still alive, residing outside town on the farm he'd been raised on. They'd have been there for his wedding that day, but he hadn't wanted them to know he had sent for a mail-order bride. "In a fire. I lost 2 brothers and a sister in the same fire. I don't know how I survived." "I'm glad you did." He reached out and squeezed her hand, feeling suddenly bold. He wondered how she'd react if he kissed her. She felt a warmth rush through her at his touch. She was surprised that he was so kind to her. "Sometimes I am." She had never voiced her feelings about that aloud before, but she'd wanted to for years. She wasn't happy being the only survivor of her family. It hurt his heart to hear her say that, but he thought he could understand it. He turned his head to look at her in the darkness. "Jessamine, I hope I'm not being too bold. May I kiss you?" Jessie felt her heart skip a beat. "Of course you may. I'm your wife." "No, I don't want you to agree just because we're married. I want to know if I may kiss you, because you don't mind if I kiss you." She swallowed hard, considering his words. "I don't mind." He rolled to his side and she did the same, facing him. He reached out and stroked her cheek with the back of his index finger. "You're so beautiful. I find it hard to believe you've never married. I didn't leave the school where I lived and worked very much, so there wasn't a lot of opportunity to meet men. I'm glad of that. You never would have waited for me otherwise." He cupped her face in both hands and leaned toward her, his lips brushing hers softly. Never in his life had he kissed a woman, and it felt strange to do so now. Jessie expected a longer kiss than he gave her, enjoying the feel of his lips on hers. When he pulled away, she sighed. "You don't like kissing me?" she asked. "That's not it at all. I want us to be able to get to know one another. Slowly. When we finally consummate our marriage, it will be because we both feel comfortable with it." She felt relief wash through her. "You truly don't mind waiting?" He shook his head. "Not at all. I believe it would be strange for us to try to pretend feelings are there when we just met today." She nodded, feeling better about the situation entirely. "Thank you." He smiled, brushing his lips across her forehead. "You're welcome." He rolled onto his back and let his eyes drift close, feeling confident for their future. As she heard his breathing become even, signaling that he was asleep, she wondered if she was happy or a bit disappointed. Did he not want to make love to her because he didn't like her? Or because he really did want to wait to get to know her better? Either way, they were married, and they would spend the rest of their lives together. She would get used to the idea. Eventually. As soon as it was light out, Jessie slipped from under the covers and found clothes, going into the bathroom to dress. She wanted to have breakfast ready before her new husband woke and felt the need to go to the diner. She could cook, and there was no reason for her to pretend she couldn't. She went into the kitchen and looked around for food, but found, well, nothing. There was nothing for her to make breakfast with. No eggs, no milk, and not even any bread. She wondered what he ate when he was hungry, and the diner wasn't open. Did he just drop in all the time? She found a piece of paper and a pencil and sat down at the table with a frown. She was going to have to shop before she could cook anything. Who didn't even keep bread and milk around? Her new husband, that's who. Jessie had just finished making her list when Bob walked into the kitchen, hiding a yawn behind his hand. "Are you ready to go to the diner for breakfast?" he asked. She nodded. "I would like to shop so I can start cooking for you today, if you don't mind." He shrugged. "I suppose that's all right, though I'm fine with eating at the diner. I would prefer to cook for you." "All right. I'll show you where the mercantile is, and you can shop there while I go to work. They'll deliver for you." "Sounds good." She had wondered how she'd be able to get the food home, but knowing the mercantile would deliver made things easier. "Do you have an account there?" He nodded. "Yes, I'll introduce you to the shopkeeper, and you can buy whatever you want." "That sounds good." She stood up, being sure to put her paper with her list on it into her reticule. She hated to shop from a list, but there was so much they needed that she didn't really have a choice at the moment. As they walked toward the diner, she said, "Tell me about the town." He shrugged. "Not sure there's a lot to tell. We have about 1,000 people in town and many others in the surrounding countryside. One fun thing to note is there's an old man who lives in the woods just outside town. He has a long, scruffy beard. People tend to be afraid of him, but he's harmless. He could sure use my services though." She smiled at that. "He sounds like a character. I will try to avoid the woods." "You don't need to. He really won't hurt you. Just sounds like someone I don't particularly want to run into." She preceded him into the diner and sat down at a table. "Are you going to be upset if we don't continue to eat here for every meal?" "I don't think so. It's just all I've ever done." He looked over at the blackboard where the specials of the day were written. "Oh, today is ham and cheese omelet day. One of my favorites. I have a feeling you say that about whatever they have for a special every day." She'd never in her life met a man who wanted to eat out so much. What was wrong with him? "I do. Most days anyway." He looked over at the waitress who came to their table. "Well, hello, Jane. I'll have the breakfast special and coffee." Jane nodded, not bothering to write anything down. "And you?" She looked at Jessie as if she was surprised the woman was there. "Who are you, anyway?" "I'm Jessie. Bob's wife." Jessie felt it was strange to have to introduce herself, but Bob didn't seem to be willing to do it for her. And I'll have the special as well. And coffee. After Jane had walked away, Bob looked at Jessie. I didn't know you preferred Jessie. Is that what most people call you? She shrugged. It's what my parents called me. And all my friends when I was little. I haven't had anyone call me that in years, but that's how I think of myself. Then I'll call you Jessie, if that's agreeable? I'd like that a lot. All of a sudden, she felt a great deal closer to him, knowing he'd use her nickname. He reached out and took her hand, squeezing it in his. We'll have to go out and spend Monday with my parents. She frowned at him. Why Monday? That seems like an odd day to go out into the country. Don't you work on Mondays? He shook his head. I don't. And my parents live halfway between here and Bagley, Texas, so they attend a country church. I attend church here in town. Sounds like Monday makes sense then. Jessie squirmed a little. I'm nervous about meeting your parents. Why? They're going to love you. Bob couldn't imagine anyone meeting Jessamine and not loving her immediately. I hope so. A lot of people wouldn't want an orphan to marry their son though. My mother doesn't care who I marry as long as I give her grandchildren. Jessie smiled. I'm not sure I'm quite ready for children yet, but she doesn't have to know that, does she? He frowned. You don't want children? I don't want a new baby tomorrow. I want to get my school established first. Have you always wanted to be a teacher? He asked. Not at all. I've always wanted to be a great writer. But that's not in the cards for me. Not today anyway. I wouldn't mind if you wanted to write 1 book or 6. He shrugged. I hope you know we don't need you to work. I can support us. I do know that, but I made a promise to start a school, so I will start a school. She shrugged. I don't go back on my word. Especially not to the woman who took me in when no one else wanted me. How could others not want you? He asked, having a hard time believing every family she knew hadn't wanted to take her in. They didn't want another mouth to feed. My grandmother wanted me, but she died a month after I moved in with her. After that, there was nowhere for me to be. Well, you're wanted here. I hope you know that. The whole town will be welcoming you with open arms, because they'll be thrilled to have a schoolteacher. I'm thrilled to be that schoolteacher, she said softly. And she was. She wanted to write books, but that's what summers were for. I'll introduce you to as many parents as possible tomorrow, he said. Tomorrow? Yes, tomorrow Sunday. Church. She frowned. I've lost track of my days after so much time on that train. She sighed. I'm glad I had books to read or I'd have lost my mind. Had you been on a train before this trip? She shook her head. No, I'd never been out of New York before this trip. Never? I guess I've never been out of Texas, so I shouldn't be too terribly surprised. Their food arrived then, and Jessie picked up her fork. The eggs looked good. After taking a bite, she smiled. She could do much better than these. And their toast was slightly overdone in her opinion. She couldn't wait to cook for her new husband. If he thought this was good, he would be thrilled by her cooking. Are you going to come home for lunch today? She asked softly. She wanted to start cooking for him, but it would take her a while to get bread made as well as the other basics taken care of. The man didn't even have 1 spice in his kitchen. He shook his head. Why don't we come here for lunch, but we can plan on eating supper at our place. Does that work for you? She nodded, a grin on her face. I'd love that. I can't wait to start cooking for you. As a girl, she'd always helped her mother in the kitchen, and then Wiggy had insisted all the girls help with the cooking at the orphanage. She was ready to be a wife, even if he wasn't ready for her to be one. Chapter 3. Dear Journal, today is my first full day of marriage, and it started out strangely. I went into the kitchen to cook breakfast, but there was no food in the house. There wasn't even a drop of milk or a spice. I made a trip to the mercantile and bought as much food as I could, and now Bob is taking me out for lunch, and he took me out for breakfast. I'll be cooking supper tonight. I never dreamed I'd be married for more than 24 hours before I cooked a meal for my husband. Bob did not expect me to consummate the marriage last night, which made me feel both sad and relieved all at once. I was relieved because I don't yet have the feelings for him that I want before I make love with my husband, but I was sad that he didn't seem to want me. Maybe he will send me back to New York. I don't know. I still don't feel like anyone wants me around. I hope I can get over those feelings someday. I don't know if they're just me, or if I'm reading people correctly. The few people I've met in town so far have been welcoming, but I'm nervous about meeting Bob's parents. They are farmers who live outside of town, and he plans to take me to meet them on Monday. Is anyone not nervous about meeting their in-laws? Jessie spent the morning putting up the food she'd purchased and starting a loaf of bread. The dough was rising by the time Bob arrived to walk her to the diner for lunch. She planned to make a nice pot roast with potatoes and carrots for supper. She had always planned to have a kitchen garden, but there was no place here for her to do so. She would have to continue purchasing her vegetables. Jane served them for lunch again. "Aren't you planning on cooking for your husband?" she asked, giving Jessie a strange look. "We just married yesterday afternoon. I had to buy food before I could start cooking. I'll fix supper tonight, and I will cook for him as much as he'll allow, going forward." Jessie wanted to add that she didn't know why Jane cared so much about what Bob was eating, but she didn't want to be rude. That was not the way to start out in a new town. "What'll you have?" she asked. "I want water to drink, and I'll take your special," Jessie said, nodding at the blackboard. It listed chicken and dumplings as the special of the day. "I'll have the same, but I want coffee," Bob said. After Jane was gone, he frowned at Jessie. "You don't have to cook for me if you don't want to. Don't worry about what people like Jane say. They don't know either of us and have no right to say anything. I do want to cook for you. I enjoy cooking, and it is something I always expected to be able to do for my husband. I didn't know I would find the only man in the world who prefers to eat in diners every night." He smiled. "Well, at least you know it's not your cooking. I haven't tried it yet." She was sure once he did try it, he would realize her cooking was far superior to the local diner. That's true. The food was put in front of them, and she took a bite. It tasted rather bland to her, and she was again pleased. The worse their food was, the better hers would seem in comparison. "Did your mother cook?" "She did. She never enjoyed it, and she wasn't good at it. The food here is so much better than hers. That's why I eat here so much." Jessie frowned. Poor man. No wonder he was so thin. She'd fatten him up in no time. "How was work this morning?" she asked. "Oh, it was fine. Every day pretty much feels the same when you're cutting hair all day long." He rubbed the back of his neck. "It's a good living though." "I'm sure it is." She finished eating. "I have to say, I love the setup in your kitchen. It's going to be a pleasure to work in it." "I'm glad. I just wish you'd understand that you don't have to cook if you don't feel like it." "I do feel like it." Bob shrugged, deciding he'd let her have her way. She was a stubborn little thing, this bride of his. Once you start teaching, it'll be harder to keep up with the housework. That's okay, though. I want you to keep that in mind. I will. She took a sip of her water. "How much longer before you need to be back?" He glanced at his watch and put some coins on the table. "We need to start walking now. I try to make sure I'm not closed for more than an hour. Everyone knows to wait if I'm not there, but I still hate to make anyone wait on me. I don't think it's polite." "I can understand that." Jessie smiled at him. "I was worried that you wouldn't be at the train station when I arrived. I was practically panicking as I thought about it. But you were there, and I shouldn't have worried at all." "Of course I was there. My bride was coming into town. Where else would I be? You could have forgotten or simply sent a friend or relative to fetch me. Or you could have decided to marry someone else in the meantime. I see why you want to be a writer." "You do?" "Yes, your imagination runs away with you." Maybe you should work on keeping your thoughts firmly in reality, instead of floating off whenever you like. I'll try to do that. No one else had ever noticed her overactive imagination. Did that mean he already knew her better than anyone else did? And on such short acquaintance? If so, that was strange. When they reached the barber shop, he went inside and she went around back to climb the stairs to their apartment. The bread had risen nicely, so she punched it down and shaped it into a loaf. She spent her afternoon cleaning and cooking. The house was mostly well kept from what she could see. He either enjoyed cleaning, or he had hired someone to come in and do it for him. She was surprised at just how tidy the place was for a bachelor. Once everything else was done, she sat down with pencil and paper and started to write. Just letting her thoughts flow. She had stories to tell, whether or not there was anyone who wanted to read them. Bob wasn't looking forward to eating his pretty wife's cooking. There was no way she could look as good as she did and be talented at cooking. How could she be? At the end of his long day, he locked up his shop and headed up the stairs. He wasn't sure what he would find when he got home, but he was looking forward to seeing his sweet new wife. As soon as he opened the door, the aroma hit him and his mouth started to water. If her cooking tasted half as good as it smelled, he would never regret marrying her, and he would hate eating out. He couldn't remember the diner or his mother's cooking ever smelling so good. He followed his nose into the kitchen, sitting down as she rushed around finishing up her preparations. Supper smells amazing. I'm glad you think so. I do love to cook. It was one of those things she thought of as special, because she'd done it with her mother so much. Do you sew as well? He asked. She shook her head. That's something I've never really gotten the hang of. I hope you weren't counting on me to do all the sewing for you? No, of course not. Mr. Peabody at the Mercantile always hires a young woman to come in and sew. She specializes in men's shirts, but she'll sew for anyone. Good. I don't want to have to think about that. Cooking and teaching will be enough to fill my days. She took the roast out of the oven and transferred it onto a platter, using the drippings from the meat to make a gravy. He watched her efficient movements, impressed that she really did know what she was doing in the kitchen. I may never be willing to eat at the diner again, he said softly. She laughed. I'm sure I won't be able to break you of that habit very quickly. You'll want to eat out for every meal tomorrow. She poured the finished gravy into a bowl and carried it to the table. A few minutes later everything was ready and she was sitting across from him. Would you say grace for us? Bob nodded, bowing his head. When he'd finished, he lifted his fork. I can already taste this. He took a bite of the roast, his eyes closing as he enjoyed the meat. This is fabulous. It tastes even better than it smells. Thank you. She was happy he was enjoying it, and he wouldn't make her eat out for every meal. Tell me about the other women who taught at the orphanage. She stared down at her food, abruptly losing her appetite. There were 26 of us. We all had a name starting with a different letter of the alphabet. One disappeared recently, and no one is quite sure where she went. I think Xenia was eaten by a bear, but no one would confirm or deny my suspicions. He grinned. Eaten by a bear, huh? I hope not. That would be pretty gruesome. Yes, it would. Xenia was one of my favorite people too. We were never close, but she was special. You know? I do know. Bob didn't have a lot of close friends. He'd always held himself apart. He had acquaintances. He cut the hair of every man in the area so he knew them all, but he never felt close to any of them. Do you have brothers and sisters? She asked. She realized then that he knew a great deal about her, but she knew little about him. I have 3 brothers. I'm the 4th. I'm the last to marry. My brothers all have children and they make my mother happy. I'm the only one she complains about, because she wants me to marry as well. She wanted you to marry. You're married now, so she'll just want you to have children. You're right. That's exactly what she wants. Were you the oldest, youngest, or in the middle? Oldest. I feel like I was responsible for not getting my siblings out of the house. I can see that. I hope you know that you weren't responsible. She shrugged. Sometimes I know that. Sometimes I don't. It depends on the day. Well, I don't know if it helps, but from what I can see, you're a remarkable woman. I can't wait to get to know you even better, and I'm excited to show you off to my parents. What do your brothers do? She asked, not wanting to listen to him compliment her. She knew she was nothing special. My oldest brother, Gabe, is a farmer. He'll take over my parents' farm when they decide to retire. The next brother in line is John, and he's the sheriff here in town. Then the brother that's just older than me is a rancher. And I'm a barber. Do you ever wish you were oldest and the one inheriting the farm? She asked. Never. I'm not a fan of getting up before dawn to milk cows. I hate the idea of being dependent on the weather for my income. I love what I do. I can see that. It must be nerve-wracking every time the weather does something unpredictable. My father was a farmer and he loved it, but I know he got stressed at times. She took a sip of her water, enjoying watching him eat the meal she'd prepared. Yes, my father was the same. He was disappointed when I didn't become a farmer, but I couldn't. I am much better suited to a job where I know my pay will be steady. He glanced over and saw a sheaf of papers on the work table. What are you working on? She shrugged, blushing a little. I was working on a story in my head. I'm always working on something. I enjoy writing a little too much. I'm glad you had some time to do something you enjoy then. It sounds to me like you've had too little time for it. Are you sure you want to teach? She nodded. I'm sure. I made a promise, and I never break my word. She had learned at her father's knee that a man or woman was only as good as his or her word. Her word had to be gospel and mean everything to her, and it did. That's a good motto, he said. After his third helping, he got to his feet, surprised he hadn't popped right out of his clothes. He carried his plate to the sink and poured water from the kettle into it. Since you cooked, I'll wash the dishes. You can't do that. It's my job. When you are teaching, you're going to want me to do dishes. You know it's going to be harder then. Let's get into the right habits now. She frowned. I feel like it should all be my job. Not yours. You can feel like that if you want, but I didn't bring you out here to be my kitchen slave. He washed the dishes as she dried them. I will ask the pastor before church tomorrow to announce a meeting of parents of school-aged children after church. Then you can talk to them and together everyone can decide when school will start. You can also get an idea of how many students you'll have and what the attendance will be. That sounds really good. I'll be glad to get some things settled, and I can start preparing once I know what I'm expected to do. Good. I know it'll make you happy to start preparing. Do you have any idea how many students I'll have that won't be able to read? He shrugged. I know many in town are illiterate. You will just have to wait and see. Maybe the parents at the meeting tomorrow will be able to answer that. I hope so. Knowing what to expect before the first day would be really helpful. She put the last dish onto the shelf. Thank you for washing the dishes. I hope you know I don't expect it of you. I know you don't, but I'm happy to help. If we're both going to be working, we should share the load around the house. I can't cook, but I know how to wash dishes. Well, we'll make a good team then. She looked at him for a moment before standing on tiptoe to kiss his cheek. I do appreciate your attitude about our workload. When she started to step away from him, he caught her by the waist. I want to wait until we know one another better to consummate the marriage, as you know, but I would like it if you wouldn't mind if I kissed you on occasion. Would that be all right? Absolutely. I'm just glad you are willing to wait until we know one another. I think I would feel as if I was doing something wrong if we consummated before I knew you well. He smiled, happy she understood him. He was pleased he was now able to spend time with her without being as nervous as he had been. Lowering his head, he kissed her softly, just a whisper touch. When she didn't back away, he deepened the kiss, pulling her closer. When he finally raised his head, her eyes were closed and her lips were moist. She looked like she had just been kissed, and he liked that she looked so dazed by it. How was that? She smiled, leaning forward and resting her forehead against his shoulder. That was nice. I don't think I'm going to hate being married to you. She was half joking and half serious. She had expected to hate marriage, but with Bob it seemed natural. Even as a stranger, he was a kind one and he made her feel at ease. I'm glad to hear that. If you did hate being married to me, I'd feel guilty. He shook his head. I'm going to read the paper. Maybe you could bring your book into the parlor tonight. She nodded, hurrying to get her book. She sat down beside him on the sofa, close enough that she could rest her head on his shoulder if she wanted. And she thought about it for a moment before she decided to just read her book. What are you reading? He asked. The Bostonians, by Henry James. I haven't read it before, and it's wonderful so far. Do you always have a book in your hands? Because from what I can see, it appears that you do. I do enjoy reading a great deal. I don't always have a book in my hands, but often I do. It makes me happy to escape into other worlds and forget about this one, if only for a short while. He frowned, wondering if he'd ever be able to convince her that this world was better than any imaginary one. He certainly hoped he could. Chapter 4. Dear Journal, being married is certainly interesting. Bob is more than I ever imagined a husband could be. I look at him and see a man who is slender and not at all physically like the man of my dreams. He wears spectacles and has blonde hair. I've always been attracted to men with dark hair. But there's something special about him. Would you believe he helps me with the dishes? He's even set up for me to meet with the parents of school-aged children after church today. I can't decide if I'm nervous or just thrilled that he's worked so hard to help me with my hopes and dreams. Well, my hopes anyway. Or should I call it my goals? My hopes and dreams are to write books and have people actually read them, but my goals, well, my goals are to do as Madam Wig has asked and start a school here for the children. An inclusive school that will include the children of former slaves as well as Indian children. If they want to be schooled, I will teach them all. I can't wait to see what the day has in store for me. What the month has in store. What my life has in store. I'm no longer stagnant. I'm moving forward. Life with Bob is good. After a breakfast of French toast, bacon, and coffee, Bob and Jessie set off for church. As soon as they arrived, Bob left her for a moment to talk to the pastor and ask him to call a meeting. While he was off, a stranger walked up to Jessie. Are you Bob's new wife? I heard he'd married a mysterious young woman. Jessie laughed. I'm mysterious all right. Jessie Samuels. I'm Anna Randall. It's nice to meet you. I'm hoping to start a school here in town. I was a teacher in New York before I came here to marry Bob. Oh, that's wonderful. I have 7-year-old twins. They're ready to start school. Jessie smiled. Bob is talking to the pastor right now about having a meeting with all parents of school-aged children after church. I want to get an idea of how many children would attend the school and their ages, as well as any kind of schooling they've had. My boys have not had any schooling at all. They can count to 10, and that's about it. Well, I can get them reading. No trouble at all. Jessie looked around her, trying to get an idea of how many children were in the room. I heard a school just started in Bagley, and I was seriously considering putting the boys in the wagon every morning and heading over there so they could get some schooling. I'm glad that's not going to be necessary. How far away is Bagley? It takes about an hour by wagon. But for the opportunity to go to school, it would be worth the drive. I can see that. Do you know the name of the teacher? Jessie had to wonder if it was one of the other women who had left the foundling home to become a mail-order bride. I don't. I heard she moved there to marry Jack McLean. The McLeans are practically royalty around here, so their business is known to everyone. Anna looked around to see her twins wrestling with a bigger boy. Oh, I need to stop the boys from hurting each other or anyone else. Nice to meet you. The last words were called over her shoulder as she hurried across the church. Bob appeared back at her side then, and the pastor stepped up to the pulpit. "Let's all sing together." As soon as church was over, the parents met at the front of the church, just as the pastor had asked. Jessie got up in front of them, a little nervous about the public speaking, but she knew it was necessary. "I'm Jessie Samuels, and I was a teacher in New York before I moved here to marry Bob. I wanted everyone to know that I would like to start a school, right here in your church, and my target date to start it is November 1st, which is only 2 weeks away. Is there anyone here who would be interested in their child attending school?" All but a couple of the hands went up, and those parents quickly excused themselves. Jessie felt bad that the opportunity for education would not be given to their children, but she had no way of knowing if the children were taught by their parents in a home environment. Slowly Jessie went from parent to parent, writing down the names, ages, and education of each child. It didn't take her long to realize that she had very few children who could read. That was all right. She would enjoy teaching them to lose themselves in literature. She actually looked forward to the challenge. Once she was finished, she asked if everyone would be fine with starting November 1st, and was surprised at how enthusiastic the remaining parents were about their children learning. One man asked if the children would be taught things like advanced farming techniques. For a moment Jessie was taken aback, but then she nodded. "If that's a subject you want taught, I'll make sure to study up on it. Your children will learn whatever they need to learn." By the time the meeting was over, Jessie was both exhausted and starving. "Let's head home so I can fix lunch." "There's no need," Bob said, obviously thinking about her comfort. "Let's eat at the diner. This is when we should eat out. You shouldn't have to cook when you're as tired as you are." "How do you know I'm tired?" she asked. "Your eyes don't seem to want to stay open." "Trust me. It's obvious." She smiled. "I guess it is. Maybe I need a nap this afternoon. I'm not horribly fond of public speaking, and it takes a lot out of me." "Isn't teaching public speaking?" Bob asked. "Not in the same way this was. I don't mind being up in front of the children. I can see where that would be different." He led her toward the diner. "Until last year, the diner wasn't open on Sundays, but I talked them into opening, and they now do a booming business. I kept having to go to my mother's on Sundays, and her cooking is nothing to be proud of. Have you ever considered learning to cook? You could save a lot of money that way." He laughed. "I tried to boil water once. It was a disaster. No, I will not be learning to cook." "But why should I with you here?" She smiled. "I'm glad you know that I can cook. I don't think I would enjoy eating at the diner for every meal. I never minded it. Sometimes there were other bachelors there, and we'd eat together. Mostly it was just me though." Jessie had not only never eaten alone in a restaurant, she'd never eaten in one. Even on the train, she'd done her best to save her pennies by just eating the sandwiches that people brought by. "I guess if that's what works for you, then you should do it." "Not anymore though." "Does that mean you're going to cook 3 meals a day for me?" Bob asked. "It does. Not when I start teaching of course, but for the next couple of weeks." She'd spent some time looking around the church that morning, thinking about what would need to be done to make it a classroom. She was sure she could teach there, and she was excited to start. "I'll take it. I won't mind eating at the diner for lunch when you start working, but it will be nice to eat at home for a change." She wanted to laugh at his abrupt change in attitude, but she couldn't. She would simply take it as a victory that he liked her cooking. "I hope you won't mind. The waitresses at the diner would be lost without you." "That's true." Bob grinned at her, taking her hand in his. He found himself getting more and more comfortable with her, and he liked it. She was awfully special to him. "I'm going to start working on lesson plans tomorrow. Most of the children I will be teaching don't know how to read yet, so I will be starting them at the same point. We'll see how things progress from there." "Were you happy with how the meeting went?" He had sat through it, but he had simply taken the opportunity to look at his beautiful wife. He hadn't paid much attention to anything else. They sat down at what she was starting to think of as their table. "Yes, I was. The parents seemed to be excited their children would have the opportunity to get an education. And I feel like the children will be happy to learn. I do hope no one expects me to be teaching a lot of upper sciences. I would have to find a co-teacher for that. We're simple folk here, and we're in a rural community. No one will expect you to teach complicated science. They probably don't have any idea it exists. Just teach what you feel comfortable teaching. She liked that idea. Oh, good. The children can learn to count to 10, and we'll call that their math. He laughed. I think you might need to do a wee bit more than that in the math realm. She sighed. Yes, you're probably right. I think children should know enough about addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division that they don't get taken for fools by people who know more. I just don't want to teach the complicated maths like algebra and geometry that I was forced to learn. He blinked a couple of times. No one is going to ask that of you here. Good, then I will simply skip those things. She glanced over to look at the special for the day. Chili. What is that? You've never had chili? I guess we have it here because of the Mexican influence. Chili is like a soup or stew, with a tomato base, with beef and beans mixed in. It's spicy. She frowned for a moment. I'll try it. You like it? Sure. It's chili. What's not to like? The diner does a good job with theirs. My mother's was almost inedible, but it was probably one of her best dishes. I really don't want to eat your mother's cooking. He laughed. You're probably going to need to on Monday. Could I offer to help her in the kitchen? Or better yet, tell her I want her to see that I'm a good enough cook for her baby, and offer to do it myself? That might just work. They both ordered the chili and water to drink. I hope you like chili as much as I do, he said as the waitress walked away. I'm not overly fussy about my food, she said. Coming from a poor family, she'd had no choice but to eat whatever her mother was able to cook. Good, then we'll get along just fine. My mother was such a terrible cook that I'll eat just about everything. It made things easier. I'm sure it did. My mother was a wonderful cook, but we didn't always have a lot of food to work with. She would do what she could with whatever we could afford, and she taught me to be able to do the same. I can cook on a simple budget if that ever becomes necessary. I certainly hope it doesn't. He shook his head. I truly enjoyed the meal you made last night. If you cook everything that well, I will eat at home for every meal happily. The chili was put in front of them, and Jessie eyed it skeptically. She took her spoon and stirred it a bit, looking at the ingredients. It smells good. Try it. I promise you won't regret it. She scooped up a bite and tried it, her eyes widening. It's good. Not too spicy, but it tastes just right. I like it. Good. Then eat it. She laughed. Maybe I should learn to cook this. After that she ate with gusto, just then realizing how terribly hungry she was. She hoped he wasn't one of those men who didn't think women should have appetites, because she wasn't going to pretend to be something she wasn't. You should. I bet you could improve on the basic idea of it. He continued eating, happy with their ability to be quiet around one another or talk. He'd never quite realized how easy it could be to talk to a woman. What are your plans for the rest of the day? She shrugged. I don't really have any. I'll make supper, of course. Should I make something to take to your mother's house tomorrow? No, you don't need to. I mean, if you want to eat something that won't make you sick, it might be a good idea, but other than that, she'll provide. She frowned. I guess I'm going to need to make something then, huh? A loaf of bread maybe? Or a dessert? He had a sweet tooth that was a bit overwhelming at times. He wondered if he should mention it. I could bake a loaf of bread and a cake. Then we'd at least have a couple of things to eat that would be good. What kind of dessert do you like? Cake is good? She wanted to do whatever he would prefer, but it was hard when she didn't know his preferences. I'll eat anything with sugar in it. I have a true love for sweets. She smiled. Maybe I'll make a big batch of cookies then. I'll look through what I purchased yesterday and come up with something. Thank you. For what? She was only doing what any good wife would do. For taking my tastes into account and for caring about what I want. That's my job as your wife. She smiled, feeling a bit strange to call him her husband. Yes, they were married. Yes, they were living together and even sharing a bed. But there wasn't any other true intimacy between them. Why did you decide to become a barber? He shrugged. The barber in town was getting ready to retire when I was of an age to look for a profession. He offered to teach me everything he knew, and I took him up on it. I bought the shop and the apartment from him when he retired, and I've been a barber ever since. I enjoy what I do. I'm glad. How about you? What made you decide to be a teacher? She shrugged. I don't think I ever really decided to be one. I was getting old enough to go out on my own, and Madame Wiggy came to me and asked me to stay on as a literature teacher, because she knew of my love of books. I agreed, and then I was a teacher. So it wasn't really a decision. It just sort of happened. Right. I don't regret it, because I don't know what else I would have done. Been a maid or a nanny maybe. You don't think you'd have become a writer? He couldn't believe that wasn't the first thing she'd mentioned. I don't think I have the confidence to send anything I've written to someone to publish. I'm not sure I would ever have that kind of courage. It would take a lot, and I'm used to rejection. He frowned. What do you mean you're used to rejection? She sighed, realizing she'd said too much. After my parents' death, no one really wanted me. I tried to live with several relatives, but it didn't work. So I ended up in the orphanage, and though I was treated well, I still felt lost. I can see that. He shook his head. Well, I'm not going to reject you. I think you're the most beautiful woman I've ever met, and I have the pleasure of being your husband. Don't expect to be sent away. She smiled, hoping he'd always feel that way. For some reason, she just never seemed to be good enough to keep around. Only Wiggy had ever seemed to want her. And she'd been sent away from her as well. Not as quickly as expected, but still, she wasn't kept around. I hope you always feel like that. He couldn't believe she'd even doubt her place with him. She was beautiful, she could cook, and she planned to work. What more could he ask for in a wife? You're awfully special. I don't think my opinion on that will ever change. As they walked back to their apartment, she asked, What do you usually do on your days off? I always go to my mother's on Monday. She does my laundry for me. I don't mind cleaning and keeping things neat, but I hate laundry. Mother loves it, so I take mine to her. And I spend the day with her as she does it. On Sundays, I go to church and have a quiet day at home. I catch up on any cleaning that I've gotten behind on. Do some reading. It's nice to have a day to mostly relax. It would be. I think that's great. You can still relax and read today. I'm caught up on cleaning, and I think I'm going to spend the afternoon baking, and maybe doing a bit of writing. She thought about the journal Wiggy had given her the day she left and smiled. It was special to her, and she'd vowed to write in it every day of her marriage. At least once. Hopefully she would be able to find time to do a bit more than that. That sounds good to me. A relaxing day at home for both of us. And he vowed he would find someone to publish her writing, even if he had to pay them to do it. She deserved to feel proud of herself and not rejected. He would make it his mission in life to make sure that's exactly what happened. Chapter 5. Dear Journal, today has been good so far. I had a meeting with the parents of the children I'll be teaching, and I can see I have my work cut out for me. Only a few of the children are able to read. I will be starting them all in one class, and we'll divide from there as some of the children learn faster than the others. It's been nice to have an entire day with my new husband. Initially, I did not find him attractive at all, but the more I get to know him, the better looking he is to me. I'm certain it's because he is a kind, good man. I have certainly been blessed. If someone has to marry a stranger, they should get to marry a stranger like Bob. Jessie spent the afternoon working on the supper she was preparing, as well as baking cookies and a loaf of bread. As she worked, her mind was on what ingredients she wanted to put in her chili. If she could perfect the dish her new husband was so fond of, she was sure he would want to keep her. When she took the first sheet of cookies out of the oven, she put a few on a plate, still piping hot. She didn't know why, but hot cookies were so much better before they'd cooled. She poured some milk into a glass and took it, along with the cookies, into Bob, who was sitting on the sofa reading the newspaper. He looked up with a smile. "I've been smelling those and wondering if there would be enough for me to sample a few today." "There will be plenty more. I made a double batch." She stood and watched as he ate the first cookie, loving the look on his face as he took a bite. Her favorite part about cooking had always been watching people eat what she'd fixed. "These are wonderful." "Thank you." She nodded and hurried back into the kitchen. Now that she knew he was happy with her cookies, she was pleased. After supper that evening, he once again did the dishes, while she dried them. It seemed odd to her to have a man willing to help with household chores. She could not remember her father ever lifting a finger inside the house. He had taken care of the farm, and had worked hard, but he had never been willing to do women's work. After the dishes were done, Bob took her hand and pulled her into the parlor. "Sit with me. I don't know that we've ever taken some time to just sit and talk." "We talk at meals." "Yes, but I just want to get to know you better." Jessie nodded. She really understood, because she felt as if she'd just touched the surface with him. "What do you like to do in your spare time?" she asked. He shrugged. "I read the paper." "Let me ask it this way. If you suddenly had more money than you knew what to do with and you no longer needed to work, what would you do with your time?" Bob looked at her, obviously thinking. "I really don't know. I think I'd enjoy traveling." "I didn't like the train ride here," she said, wrinkling her nose. "But maybe if I was going somewhere interesting and exotic it would be different." "Texas isn't interesting or exotic?" "Well, Texas wasn't a place I chose to go. I came here so I could marry you, but it wouldn't have been on my list of places I wanted to see." "Where would you go, if you could go anywhere?" he asked. "England." Her answer was quick, since she'd often given it some thought. "I love books set in England more than any others. I would like to see the places that I read about. I want to go closer to where the author was imagining when they set up the worlds I want to live in." "If you could write any book in the world, what do you think you would write?" She pursed her lips thinking for a moment, surprised when he leaned in for a kiss. Her eyes met his, and his were filled with humor. "Were you trying to get me to make that face so you could kiss me, or did you really want the answer?" "Oh, I want the answer, but I couldn't pass up the opportunity for a kiss." The more he got to know her, the more beautiful she became. He hoped they felt a little more comfortable with one another quickly, because he didn't want to wait a lot longer before they consummated their marriage. She shook her head, but he could see her lips were still corked with amusement. "I think I would like to write for older children. I love the idea of creating fantasy worlds and making them a place the children could disappear into." "So children's fantasy? Interesting. Would you use magic in the fantasy?" "Oh, definitely. What's a world without magic?" She sat back, her mind already creating a world she wanted to live in and write about. "Tell me what your story would be. Would it be a young man making a pilgrimage to a new place? Or would it be a man and woman finding one another and falling in love?" "I think it would be a young woman's journey. She would find love at the end, but that would be secondary to her journey for acceptance." He grinned. "Sounds like you've given it a lot of thought." "Well, that book is in my head, but there's another for younger readers, and yet another novel for adults. I can't stop thinking about them all. I really do need to put them all down on paper. I think you should take that time. I wish you hadn't committed to teaching, because I would be happy if you wanted to stay at home and write. Maybe someday. The children in town really do need an education, and I'm qualified to give them one. Without the sciences, of course." Bob smiled. "Of course. Who needs science anyway? Anyone who wants to be a doctor. Or an inventor. Or a scientist. I would love to have one of my students become an inventor someday. It would make me feel like I'd really accomplished something. What if one of your students becomes a best-selling writer? Would that satisfy you? Jessie's whole face lit up at the idea, giving him her answer before she opened her mouth. It would make me very happy. As they continued talking, they uncovered one another's hopes, dreams, and true inner hearts, finding each other more interesting and attractive than they had before. It wasn't a perfect start to a marriage, but it was as close to perfect as either had expected. As they drove toward his childhood home the following day, Bob told Jessie a little more about his parents. My father has always been a farmer. He owns the biggest farm in this part of Texas, and we were always better off than most. He has several farm hands, but we boys were expected to pull our own weight as well. My parents are immigrants, and they have a strong work ethic. They expect each of their sons to have one as well. Where are they from? England. They moved here as newlyweds many years ago. I'm not sure why they thought Texas was the place to begin farming, but it has worked out for them. Oh, I don't think I can like you. My parents were Stewarts from Scotland. They would have hated your parents. He sighed. I think we need to get past that and move on with our lives. English and Scots are all part of the United Kingdom now. That's true. I suppose I can stop hating you on principle then. She grinned at him. That's very kind of you. He pulled into his parents' yard, parking next to the house. They're going to be a little startled to meet you, because they didn't know I was marrying. Don't worry about it though. I just didn't want them to feel like we needed a huge wedding. Would they have insisted on something big? Yes. And I would have been embarrassed and it would have been hard to get through it all. It's better this way, but today might be just a little awkward. She wasn't certain she wanted to be there when his parents found out they'd married without them knowing about it. There was obviously no choice, though, because she was already there with him. After he helped her down, she got the cookies and bread from behind the seat. She'd put them in a wicker basket and wrapped cloth around them, so they would keep. I think I can do this, she said uncertainly. You can. I promise. We'll do it together. They're going to love you. His father would love her cooking, if nothing else. He walked right into the house, calling out, Mother. I'm here. His mother came out of the kitchen, her hands on her hips. She was a rather round woman, and she wore an apron that covered the entire front of her dress. Why did I have to hear it from the neighbors that you married? What is wrong with you? She glared at Bob, her English accent strong. He shrugged. I didn't want a big wedding, and I thought this was the best way. Mother, this is Jessamine, my wife. Jessie, this is my mother, Sarah. It's nice to meet you, Mrs. Samuels. And you, Jessamine. Please call me Jessie. Where are you from, Jessie? Mrs. Samuels accepted the basket of food she was handed, but didn't even glance at it. She was too intent on learning about her new daughter-in-law. I was born and raised in New York. I came out here on Friday to marry Bob. Mrs. Samuels sighed heavily. Come into the kitchen with me and help me fix lunch. Robert, you may go find your father. He's in the barn. Bob slipped out the door without a backward glance. He knew his mother and Jessie would get along fine, and he didn't want to interfere. Jessie followed the older woman into the kitchen. How can I help you? Do you cook? Mrs. Samuels asked. I do. I enjoy cooking a great deal. It was something my mother and I enjoyed doing together. And how does your mother feel about letting you travel halfway across the country to marry a stranger? I don't think she would have been very happy about it, but she died 7 years ago. Jessie walked to the sink and washed her hands, not watching for the pity on the other woman's face. And your father? My entire family died in a fire. I've lived in an orphanage for the past 6 years. First as a student of the Foundling Home and School, and then as a teacher. I plan to start a school here in nowhere. Jessie turned back to look at her mother-in-law, wondering how she felt about having an orphan in the family. I think that's a very noble pursuit. Welcome to the family, Jessie. Mrs. Samuels opened her arms wide and enveloped Jessie in a hug. Please, call me Sarah as my other daughters do. Jessie smiled, pleased that the woman thought of her daughters-in-law as daughters. She felt as if she was truly accepted. Thank you, Sarah. As they worked together, Jessie could immediately see why Sarah wasn't a good cook. She didn't say anything to her about it, but the woman had no concept of measuring anything. She just threw all the food together into a pot. Jessie went behind her to add seasoning and do her best to make things taste better than they would have without her, but she knew there was no way she could completely salvage the meal. By the time lunch was served, Jessie's stomach was growling. She was just happy to know there would at least be bread good enough to eat. As they were putting the stew on the table, Jessie hurried to the basket and unwrapped its contents. I brought bread that will go nicely with the meal. Her mother-in-law looked at it and shrugged. I'm sure my family will be pleased to have something that tastes good on the table. Jessie burst out laughing. You know you're a terrible cook? Oh yes. I hate to cook. If I was good at it, I'd be expected to do it more. As it stands, my husband looks for every excuse to take me to the diner in town. Sarah shrugged. It's better if I don't even try. Well, the next time I come over, may I make lunch then? I enjoy cooking. I'm not sure I can keep liking you if you enjoy cooking, but I'll do my very best. Sarah smiled. I would love it if you would cook when you come over. Just don't tell my son that I know I'm a terrible cook. I love watching how hard he works at trying not to hurt my feelings. Oh, I'll do my very best. Jessie couldn't express just how much she liked Bob's mother. She was something else. They heard the men come in then, and Jessie couldn't help but giggle, knowing she knew something about Bob's mother that he didn't. Bob walked into the room and pressed a kiss to her cheek. She was sure he was doing it for his parents, but it didn't stop her cheek from burning where his lips had touched. What's so funny? He asked. Oh, just something your mother said. She's very amusing. Mother? Bob looked back and forth between the two women, obviously not believing her. He shook his head after a moment when neither explained and introduced her to his father. This is my father, Robert. Jessie nodded. It's nice to meet you, Mr. Samuels. Please, call me Robert. Everyone does. Mr. Samuels looked at his wife, who nodded slightly. It looks like you ladies have been having a nice time while cooking. I must say, that's a pleasant surprise. She even brought bread. I love any person who brings food into my house. Sarah smiled at Jessie. I do too. Robert said. Let's eat. The meal was enjoyable with light-hearted chatter. Bob took a bite of the stew, and though he didn't look pleased, he did look surprised. Mother, I think this is the best stew you've ever made. At his words, Robert took a quick bite. This is better than usual. He looked over at Jessie. Did you help with the seasoning? Jessie shrugged. I added a little of this and a little of that. Robert looked like he wanted to say something more, but he bit his tongue. It's tasty. Jessie looked down at the stew, and she knew she couldn't have improved it enough for it to actually taste good. When she took the first bite, she wanted to spit it out. It wasn't nearly as good as the worst stew she'd ever eaten. She forced herself to chew then swallow it, surprised to see that Robert and Bob were eating it as if it tasted good. No wonder Bob was always happy to eat at the diner. After the meal, Jessie washed the dishes, while Sarah dried them. The men had gone back outside. That stew was terrible, even with the extra seasoning I put in. How could you eat it? Sarah shrugged. I guess I've gotten used to eating terrible food over the years. It makes me happy to eat at the diner so much. I'm sure it does. Jessie shook her head. Have you thought about hiring a cook? Yes, I've mentioned it to Robert every single year of our marriage. He just keeps telling me that my cooking will get better with a little practice. I have to say, I've deliberately gotten worse over the years. And he's still not willing to hire a cook? With the way Bob had raved about her cooking, Jessie had a hard time believing his father didn't want better food as well. No. I think he's gotten used to how awful it is. When one of my sons married, his stomach was upset for months. Robert decided it was because he'd had decent cooking for the first time in his life. He decided he would keep things as they were with no cook. Jessie shook her head, laughing a little. I'm starting to worry about the mental prowess of the men in your family. Bob's the smartest of the bunch. But don't tell him I said that. It'll go to his head. I'll be sure to keep it quiet. I have to live with the man. For just a moment, Jessie thought about bringing up the fact that they were waiting to get to know one another before they made their marriage a real one. But as desperately as she wanted to talk to another woman about it, she knew his mother was not the right person. You do. Forever and ever. I'm keeping you whether Bob likes it or not. Jessie smiled. Someone wasn't rejecting her. That was a good thing. She could be happy in this family for many years to come. Chapter 6. Dear Journal, Bob's parents are absolutely amazing people. When I first realized they were immigrants from England, I worried they would automatically dislike me because of my Scottish heritage. But they are genuinely kind and good. I was very amused by his mother, and the two of us really got along from the first moment we met. She deliberately cooks poorly so her husband will take her out to the diner here in town and she won't have to cook. I promised to keep it a secret, but it's hard, because I'm terribly amused by the whole thing. I felt as if they immediately welcomed me as a daughter, and that made me feel as if I hadn't been rejected for the first time in years. I'm pleased to say that I belong here. Finally. Hopefully I will still feel the same when Bob and I make our marriage real. If that ever happens. He casually kisses my cheek, but he doesn't seem to want to press the issue of consummating the marriage. I must not be attractive to him. Jessie baked a chicken that night. While she cooked, she couldn't stop thinking about Bob's mother and everything she'd talked about. After supper, as they again did the dishes together, Bob mentioned helping his father mend one of the stalls in the barn. I hate farm work, but there's nothing I won't do for my father. He's made me into the man I am. He must be a very good man then. Bob smiled at her. I think so. When they went to sit on the sofa together to talk, Jessie decided to find a way to let him know she would be amenable to more from their relationship. She wasn't sure how, because she didn't want to come across as too forward, and there was still a good chance he didn't find her attractive. Perhaps it wasn't possible to let him know without putting herself in a position she didn't want to be in. As soon as they were seated, she scooted toward him on the sofa, knowing that would at least tell him she didn't mind his touch. She snuggled against him, resting her head on his shoulder. Surely that had to let him know something. Bob sat stock still, wondering why Jessie was sitting so terribly close to him. She must not realize how her closeness made him feel. I'm glad you and my mother got along so well. Jessie really didn't want to talk about his mother, but she couldn't ignore his statement. We really did have a lovely time. I haven't had the opportunity to cook with another woman that way since I first got to the foundling home. Back then, Wiggy had made sure to spend time cooking with each girl, more to make sure they were competent in the kitchen than anything else. I was impressed you were able to eat the stew. It was better than anything I've ever seen her cook, but it still wasn't nearly up to your standards. That's all right. I was warned going in and I wouldn't hurt her feelings for anything. She made it clear that I was one of her daughters now. She shook her head. I haven't felt that wanted by anyone in a very long time. Only my mother ever made me feel that she relished my company. He pressed a kiss to her forehead. I relish your company. You do? She wasn't convinced. Surely if he had feelings for her that were strong, he would have at least tried to get her to consummate the marriage by now. She wasn't sure what was keeping him from attempting to move things along. He turned to her fully, dislodging her head from his shoulder. Of course I do. Isn't it obvious? She shrugged. I have never been married before. I don't know how it would feel to have a man show me he cared. Bob cupped her face in his hands, leaning down and pressing his lips to hers. I'm sorry if I'm not doing a good job of letting you know that I'm happy you're here. He felt bad that she wasn't sure of her place with him, but he didn't know how to show her. What can I do differently? Jessie didn't want to come right out and tell him she was ready for their marriage to be real, but he didn't seem to really understand anything less subtle. You could touch me and kiss me more. He wanted to groan aloud. How could he possibly do that? He'd promised himself he would give her at least a month before he would try to claim his husbandly rights, and she was making things so much harder than they needed to be. I can do that. He leaned down and kissed her again, surprised when her arms went around his shoulders. He liked it, but he hadn't expected it. She was always exceeding his expectations at everything. I start teaching in 2 weeks, she reminded him. I would like us to feel more comfortable with one another by then. More like we're really married and not strangers sharing a bed. I'll do my best, he said quietly, wondering just how to do it. I'm going to go get ready for bed and brush my hair. Would you like me to do it for you? He asked, surprising even himself. What do you know about brushing a woman's hair? She asked. Absolutely nothing. But I would enjoy brushing yours. If you'd let me, that is, I would definitely let you. I'll meet you in the bedroom in 5 minutes. She had always loved having her hair brushed. When her mother had done it for her, she'd felt tingles. Sometimes it even made her fall asleep. Having Bob brush her hair would be something else entirely, of course, but she liked the idea of it. After changing into her nightgown, she went into the bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed, waiting for Bob. She held her brush in her hand, and took the pins from her hair, giving her long brown tresses a quick brush. After a moment Bob came into the room and took the hairbrush from her, sitting behind her on the bed. It might be better if you sat on the floor, he suggested. Jessie immediately moved to the floor and sat between his feet, knowing exactly what he'd meant. She'd sat the same way at her mother's feet more times than she could count. He slowly pulled the brush through her hair and she smiled, enjoying the sensation much more than she remembered. He held out a piece of hair, looking at how it curled subtly around his fingers. You have beautiful hair, he whispered. Thank you, it's just like my mama's was. And your eyes? Do you get those from your mama too? She had the deepest brown eyes he'd ever seen. He felt like he could get lost in them. Yes, I do. And you look like your father. You have his features, but the blonde coloring of your mother. Truly he had the worst features of both his parents, but she didn't tell him that. She found him more attractive every day, and that's what really mattered. He worked on her hair in silence, enjoying the silky softness of the strands in his fingers. When he finally set the brush down, she stood and turned, still between his feet. Standing over him, she leaned down and pressed a kiss against his lips. She was not usually so demonstrative, but she could tell it was what he needed so he'd know she was ready for whatever he wanted to do. Bob was already aroused from being so close to her, and he pulled her down on the bed beside him, kissing her passionately. He wanted more. He needed more. Abruptly, he stood up and went into the bathroom, leaving her sitting on the bed, feeling bereft. Obviously, she'd just done something that hadn't pleased him, and for the life of her she didn't know what. He'd seemed to enjoy her kiss until he'd gotten up and left the room. Was she that bad a kisser? She climbed under the covers, determined to be hidden from his view when he returned to the room. She wanted to pull the covers over her head so she could cry. She didn't cry in front of people. She hadn't in years. No, she would wait until the lights were out and she could cry in private, the way a woman should. What else could she do? She'd been rejected again. When Bob came into the room a few minutes later, her eyes were closed and she seemed to already be asleep. He'd thought for a while during his absence and decided he would leave the choice of consummation to her. If she released him from his promise, then it was all good. But instead, she was lying asleep. He turned down the lamp and undressed in the dark, climbing into bed beside her. He couldn't even hold her close, because her back was to him. He sighed. Never would he be good enough for a beautiful woman like her. When Jessie woke the next morning, she was more determined than ever to be a perfect wife to Bob. She would spend the day cooking and cleaning, and when she was finished with all of that, she would begin planning her lessons for when school started. By the time Bob woke, she had bacon, eggs, and toast ready for him. She poured his coffee before sitting down across from him. "Do you want me to fix lunch today?" she asked. She was determined to be happy in his presence, even though she was dying inside. "No, you spend that time either writing or planning your lessons. I'll come home and take you to the diner." Even her cooking wasn't good enough. Jessie wondered how long it would take before he wanted to eat every meal at the diner again. She didn't tell him how she felt. She knew the folly of that. No, she would suffer silently. It was her lot in life apparently. Once he'd left for the day, Jessie gathered their dirty clothes and started on the laundry. He had a clothesline off to one side of the barber shop, and she would use it to dry the clothes. There was little space to do much outside, and she was grateful for that luxury. Jessie baked a cake for supper and she tried to make chili for the first time. She hoped she'd done well with the spices, but if not, she would just try again. She would perfect it and everything else. How else could she get Bob to fall in love with her? At lunchtime, he noticed that all of their laundry was on the line as he climbed the stairs to take her to the diner. "You've been busy today." He took a sniff and almost fell to his knees. Whatever she'd baked that morning was going to be the highlight of his day. He could already tell. "Are you ready to go?" She nodded, removing her apron and hanging it on a hook. "Let's go. I'm hungry." She took the arm he offered when they got to the street, knowing it was all for show. For some reason, he wanted people to think they had the perfect marriage, even though he hated to touch her. She would happily play along, because the truth was, she didn't want anyone to know what a difficult time she was having. She wanted to appear to have the perfect marriage too. When they walked in, Jessie saw that the special was fried chicken. "Is their fried chicken any good?" He nodded. "It's so much better than my mother's." "Isn't everything better than your mother's?" she asked, a cheeky grin on her face. He laughed. "Yes." They both ordered the special, and he told her about a little boy who had come in that day after his 3-year-old sister had taken a pair of scissors to his hair. There had been spots where it had looked almost like it had been shaved, and was still long in other places. The boy was only 18 months old, and he'd had blonde curls all over his head. "After I finished with him, there wasn't a single curl left. It was sad." Jessie shook her head. "Sounds sad. I'm glad I wasn't his mother." "Are you going to want our children to have curly hair?" "Your hair has some natural curl to it." She nodded. "It does. Do you know, it just now occurred to me that a barber brushed out my hair last night? I was thinking of you as a husband, not a professional." He shrugged. "I thought of it the same way you were. It was nice to feel so close to you." "Then why did you leave while we were kissing?" She hadn't meant to ask, and wanted to take the words back as soon as they slipped out but knew she couldn't. She would hate herself forever otherwise. He frowned. Everything was moving too quickly. "I didn't want to put you in a situation you didn't want to be in. I'm your wife." "What kind of situation could you put me in?" He shrugged. "One I don't think either of us is ready for." His response made her think. He didn't want to have that kind of relationship yet obviously. She would just play along. He could make all the moves and she would follow his lead. It seemed to be the only way they could be happy. After lunch, he walked her home and pressed a kiss to her lips before leaving her at the front of the shop. Jessie took the clothes off the line and carried them in, folding and putting them away. She wasn't going to let herself get upset about the way he was treating her anymore. He was a kind, loving man, and if that wasn't good enough for her, she didn't know what was. She spent a great deal of time that afternoon planning out her first week of school. Knowing she would need to teach the children their letters and numbers made her almost dread the whole thing. She was used to teaching the older children who only needed to be told what to read and write. These children would need to learn how to read and write. She made a seating chart based on the children's age. She knew she should make a trip to the church as well, to decide what needed to be ordered for the school. She would need a blackboard of course, but one that could be covered up on Sundays. The entire congregation did not want to see her students' math problems. By the time Bob came in at the end of the day, she was feeling much better about the situation. She hadn't moved to Texas to be a loving bride. She'd moved there to be a teacher. She'd hoped for both after meeting her husband, but since it hadn't worked out the way she wanted it to, she would move on. "I'm going to spend part of the day tomorrow at the church," she told him. "I want to measure the wall behind the pulpit so I can order a blackboard, and make curtains to cover it up on Sundays. I think that'll be the best way to use the space." "Makes sense." Bob had realized she was upset about something at lunch that day, but he really wasn't sure what it was. She was odd in that she seemed to have mercurial mood swings. He hoped that wasn't something that told how their daughters would be as well. One moody woman in his house was enough. Jessie put the meat pies she'd made on the table, and sat down across from him. She'd made 4 meat pies for him and 2 for herself. She didn't tell him, but she'd also made 2 lemon-filled pies. He'd have his sweet tooth satisfied every night if she could make it happen. After the dishes were done that evening, Jessie changed into her nightgown and retired to their bedroom to read instead of joining him in the parlor. She couldn't stand another evening of spending so much time together with him not touching her. She couldn't be that unattractive. As soon as the thought popped into her head, Jessie forced it out and looked back to the page of her book. She wasn't going to dwell on what wasn't. Instead, she was going to be happy about what was. She'd even made an appointment to meet with the teacher in nearby Bagley the next week. That would help her understand whether the two of them could work together on school pageants and plays if they chose to do so. Yawning, Jessie closed the book after putting a bookmark between the pages, and turned to her side to fall asleep. Why wait for Bob? He didn't care for her as more than a companion anyway. He'd made that abundantly clear. When Bob walked into the bedroom 30 minutes later to go to sleep, he saw her lying on her side. She had again fallen asleep before he could get into bed. He'd looked forward to having some time together, but she obviously didn't care about their special time. That was all right though. He knew he wasn't an attractive man. In 3 weeks, he would approach her anyway. Why not? She was his. As he fell asleep, he felt a sinking feeling in his heart. He thought maybe they could have a good marriage, but now it didn't look like that was possible. Chapter 7. Dear Journal, in the past few days I've managed to lose sight of why I'm in Texas. I'm not here to fall in love. I'm here to start a school and I needed a husband to support me while I did it. It cannot matter to me that he doesn't find me attractive. It cannot matter that I'm falling in love with him. Instead, I need to focus on getting ready to open my school. Today I will go to the church and measure the space where I can put my blackboard, and then I will need to sew curtains to cover it up on the weekends. I'm not a great seamstress like Faye was back at the orphanage, but even I should be able to manage simple curtains. From now on, my entries will be about starting my school, for I'm certain that's why Wiggy wanted me to have this journal. They will no longer read like a young girl's obsession with a man she has set her cap for and who doesn't return her feelings. After Bob left for work the next morning, Jessie left for the church. She spent the entire morning there, thinking about the small changes she could make during the week so her classroom would run more smoothly. While she was measuring the space for the blackboard, the pastor came in. "Hello, Mrs. Samuels. Are you getting ready to take over my church 5 days a week?" Jessie turned and smiled. "Yes, I am. I'm going to have to put a blackboard here, and I'm going to make curtains so you can cover it on the weekends. I have a feeling the congregation might get distracted by the math problems I'll be putting on it." The pastor laughed softly. "They might at that. What color would you like for the curtain to be?" "I haven't purchased the fabric yet, so it can be any color you prefer." The pastor thought for a moment. "How about a nice royal purple? This place is the home of the King of Kings after all." Jessie nodded. "I'll make sure I do just that." She made a note on the sheet of paper she was using for her measurements. "Are you excited about starting the school?" he asked. Jessie nodded enthusiastically. "I've been putting lesson plans together and thinking about ways I can modify your church to be a classroom. Of course, the modifications will need to be temporary. As long as you can change things back, you're free to make any changes you need. Is there anything I can do to make it easier for you?" "Not that I can think of. I'll be working on the things I need on my own." She finished jotting down her notes. I'm going to head over to the store to order the blackboard and chalk, and see what I can find in the way of royal purple fabric. That sounds good. Remember, you don't have to do this all on your own. There are any number of people in town who would like to assist you. I'll keep that in mind. Thank you for your help today. Jessie left the church with those words, walking toward the mercantile. She was surprised at the number of faces that already looked familiar, and the number of people who nodded to her. When she reached the mercantile, she went straight to the proprietor. I need to order a blackboard. Would you be able to help me with that? The man nodded, getting out his order book. Absolutely. What size do you need? After she'd given him the dimensions, she walked to the rear of the store where the fabric was on display. There was a woman in the back sitting at a table, pieces of fabric all around her. Jessie walked around the table and looked through the fabric that was in sight. Can I help you? The young woman asked. I'm looking for some royal purple fabric for curtains for the church. Why does the church need curtains? Jessie smiled. I'm Jessie Samuels. I'm starting a school in the church building. I need to make curtains to cover the blackboard I've just ordered on Sundays, so I don't distract people with arithmetic problems. The pastor wants everyone's full attention. The girl grinned. I'm Beth Johnson. I work here in the store making clothing for people. I see. I guess you'd know the right kind of fabric for curtains better than I would. I would think for the church you'd want velvet. And I know for a fact that we have no royal purple velvet in stock. You'll have to talk to Mr. Peabody about ordering it. Jessie sighed. I just finished talking to him. He's ordering my blackboard. Now he can order fabric for you. Beth nodded toward the front of the store. All right. Jessie walked back to Mr. Peabody, noting that a woman had joined him behind the counter. Rob, you know it's time to do inventory, and I really don't care that you hate doing it. It's necessary for our livelihood. Mr. Peabody groaned. You can do the inventory this time. I'll just watch. You know better. Now help this sweet young lady. Mrs. Peabody rushed away. Jessie spent a moment wondering just how many of the 1,000 inhabitants of Nowhere, Texas were named Robert, but decided not to ask. The number seemed overwhelming at the moment. I need to order some fabric. After Mr. Peabody had taken down her specifications, she wandered over to the fresh meat. Is there a butcher in town? Yes, there is, and I get all my meat from him. There's nothing different about mine. Jessie was certain that Mr. Peabody marked up the meat after he got it from the butcher. She would head to his shop after buying a few things there, but she would rather not have to get directions from him. She was sure he would simply tell her again that his meat was the same as the butcher's. Once she got home right before lunchtime, she put the meat in the icebox. Then she mixed up a bowl of bread dough. They were out of fresh bread, and she knew very well how much Bob loved everything she cooked. He arrived home to take her to lunch shortly after she'd set the dough to rise. Walking to the diner, she didn't try to get close to him. Instead, she pretended not to see him offer his arm. They both ordered the special, turkey and dressing, and she told him how she'd talked to the pastor and measured before ordering everything from Mr. Peabody. I feel like I've already worked a full day, and it's only lunchtime. I'm ready to get into the routine of teaching every day. Are you really? She shrugged. I do enjoy teaching. I'm sorry if I somehow made you think I didn't. I know you do. But I also know that you prefer writing. Yes, I do. But I won't be unhappy teaching. I hope you realize that. I do. He looked down at his glass of water. There was something that had gone wrong in the past day or two, and he wanted to know what it was. Have I done something to offend you in some way? She shook her head. Of course not. Never would she let him know she'd wanted more from their marriage than he was willing to give her. Why would she tell him that? Are you sure? You seem more distant for some reason. I'm just concentrating on getting ready for school. It wasn't an outright lie, but it wasn't exactly the truth either. I'm meeting with the teacher in Bagley on Saturday while you work. You don't mind if I drive there by myself, do you? No, but make sure you get someone to draw you a map. I don't want you getting lost. I will. She noticed he didn't offer to draw the map. He just told her to make sure someone did draw one. Did that mean he wasn't willing to help her? She didn't know, but that's how it sounded. Every day he was less interested in her. She wondered if he was wishing he could send her back to where she came from. When they got back to the apartment, he kissed her absently on the cheek before she rushed upstairs. She had things to do that didn't involve her new husband. Whether he liked it or not, her world didn't revolve around him. Jessie's fabric arrived on Friday morning, and she hurried home with it to start the curtains. The blackboard still wasn't in, and since Mr. Peabody had promised to find some men to put it up anyway, she wouldn't need to pick that up at all. She carefully cut the fabric and began hemming the ends. She wanted 2 curtains that could be spread apart when she was teaching, or pushed together for the church services on the weekends. Purple wouldn't be the best color for not showing chalk dust, but she'd do her best to keep it clean. If necessary, she could take the curtains home and wash them once a month. On Saturday she headed to Bagley, a map drawn by the pastor in her hand. She was supposed to meet the woman at her ranch, which was close to where the school was. It turned out her new school wasn't within city limits. Instead, it was a country school. When she arrived at the house she was told to go to, she knocked on the door and waited. Someone came to the door. "Are you Mrs. McLean?" Jessie asked softly. "No, I'll get her for you." "Are you Mrs. Samuels?" "I am. I'll be the teacher in Nowhere." "Yes, I was told you were coming today." "Have a seat," the older woman said, gesturing to the dining table, which was covered with school books. Jessie sat down and picked up one of the books. The name had caught her eye, but surely she couldn't be right. Beulah wasn't that uncommon of a name after all. She was flipping through an arithmetic book when she heard someone come into the room. She looked up and her eyes widened. "Beulah." Beulah smiled. "Jessamine. I had no idea you were the one who was teaching in Nowhere." The two of them had never been particularly good friends, but at that moment, Jessie knew they could be. They were in a totally different environment now, and they both craved someone familiar. As much as she felt it, she could also see it in Beulah's eyes. "Are you feeling all right?" It was then she realized the other woman's face was much thinner than it had been. Beulah sighed. "It shows, doesn't it? I'm expecting. I'm so sick and so tired. I spend all my time studying or sleeping. I barely remember what my husband looks like." "Are you happy?" Jessie wasn't sure what made her ask, but she had to know. Obviously Beulah had consummated the marriage, so she must feel like she was meant to be there. Beulah shrugged. "I think I will be. It's been a rough couple of months. My husband wants me to stop working because I'm so tired all the time." She shook her head. "I'm not going to stop though. I love teaching." "Is teaching what you always wanted to do?" Beulah shook her head. "Not at all. I wanted to be a doctor, but there was no way an orphan could put together enough money to go to medical school. There's really only one school that accepts women anyway." "I had no idea you wanted to be a doctor," Jessie said with surprise. "You never really spent a lot of time with the rest of us, so it's not shocking that you didn't realize it." Beulah moved to sit beside her. "Why didn't you ever want to be friends with any of us?" "We all tried." "You did?" Jessie was absolutely shocked. "I thought no one wanted me to be their friend." "Why would you think that? I remember seeing you come in and approaching you, and a lot of the other girls said the same thing. It was like you built a wall around yourself no one was allowed to penetrate." "I didn't mean to do that." Jessie shook her head. "After my parents died in a fire, I was sent from relative to relative for a while. No one wanted me. I felt rejected by everyone, and I guess I went to the foundling home expecting the same thing, and that's what I felt as a result of my expectations. I think a lot of times we think something will happen so it appears to us that it has happened." "No one rejected you. We all felt that you rejected us." Jessie thought about what Beulah had said for a moment before deciding to truly open up to this girl. She'd known her for years, and she'd never heard her to be a gossip. Beulah, may I ask you something very personal? Of course you may. I'm sure you need a friend from home as badly as I do. Well, I'm not sure how to phrase this. My new husband hasn't wanted to consummate the marriage yet. Jessie said the words quickly, trying to get them over with. Really? My husband wanted to consummate ours in the wagon on the way back from picking me up at the train station. Beulah shook her head. I tried to talk him into waiting, but he flat out refused. Why did you want to wait? Beulah sighed. I didn't want to have a baby right off, because I wanted time to establish my school. And I didn't know him. I didn't feel comfortable. Maybe your husband is waiting because he thinks you need time. Like any woman would need. Well, I guess that's a possibility. I never thought of it that way. I'm trying not to obsess about it, but it's hard to stop thinking about it. I can see that it would be hard. Let's talk about the questions you have about your school, and maybe you can concentrate on work for a while instead of on your husband. Beulah pulled her planning tablet toward her. What's your husband's name anyway? Bob. He's a good Bob. I'm glad you think so. With that, Beulah was all business, showing Jessie how she'd organized everything for her school day. It's very different teaching such a large number of students so many different things. We were both teachers of the older children, so we had 5 or 10 students per class. Do you know yet how many students you'll have? And more importantly, how many won't be able to read? I've had an informational meeting with parents, so I'm pretty aware. It's not going to be easy, but I think I can handle it. The two of them continued talking until late in the day. They had a break for lunch and then got back to it. When Jack, Beulah's husband, came into the house, Jessie looked up. What time is it? Jack looked at his pocket watch. A little after 5. Jessie jumped to her feet. Oh, no. Bob is going to be worried. I need to go. Beulah stood up and hugged Jessie. Come and see me again. We may not have been friends in New York, but there's no reason for us not to be friends here. Jessie smiled. I'd like that a lot. Good. Then I'll expect to see you sometime soon. And if you ever want to get some help with science, you just let me know. I will. Jessie hurried outside and climbed into the buggy. She had to wonder if Bob would just eat supper without her, or if he'd wait. She drove as quickly as she safely could all the way back to nowhere, and hurried up the stairs to her apartment. Bob was sitting in the parlor. Are you all right? Jessie nodded. It turns out the new teacher in Bagley is someone I knew in New York. We started talking about teaching and really lost track of time. I'm sorry I made you worry. He caught her hand and pulled her down beside him. I'm just glad you're all right. I really am. I didn't realize how late it was until Beulah's husband came home. When he said it was after 5, I really got nervous. I drove as quickly as I could. And I didn't make supper. I'm so sorry. She realized then she was the worst wife alive. No wonder he wasn't in love with her. I'm not worried about supper. We'll walk over to the diner. It was strange eating lunch alone today. I've gotten used to you being there for every meal. It's a nice feeling. She smiled at that. Well, let's head to supper then. Beulah's housekeeper fed both of us when it was time to eat, so I at least had lunch. I learned a lot from her today too. I have a better idea how to handle all the different levels of learning. And I've never taught anyone to read, but she gave me tips on how to do that as well. I really feel like I'm ready to conquer anything. He was happy to see her so excited over something. Are you on pace to open the school on November 1st as you planned? I think so. It depends on the blackboard. I can do without almost everything else, but not without the blackboard. How will I give assignments? I have no idea. Bob watched her enthusiasm with a modicum of excitement himself. He only wished she got that excited over him and not over being away from him so she could teach. At least one of them was happy. Chapter 8. Dear Journal, the strangest thing happened today. I went to visit the teacher in Bagley, which is the next town over. It turns out she was one of the girls that I taught with and grew up with at the foundling home. I was surprised to see her here, but more than that, I found out that the others in the foundling home I didn't want to be their friends, while I thought they'd rejected me. It's strange how we expect certain things, and then believe they're true, even if they're not. It was a very odd day. Beulah taught me a great deal about how to teach multiple ages at once. She has been doing it for a couple of months now, and I feel like I can learn a great deal from her. The two of us spent the entire day together, and I lost track of time. I was very late coming home, and Bob seemed genuinely concerned. I know my moods must seem mercurial, but maybe he does care for me after all. Jessie made breakfast before church, and she dressed in her Sunday best. She only had one Sunday dress, and that had seemed enough back in New York, but here she could see she would need at least one more garment that was good enough for church. Stepping into the building this week was so much different than last. There were many familiar faces, and even several people who nodded to her and she could call by name. It was good to feel like she was becoming a part of the community. After church, they went to the diner. I think we need to just eat lunch at the diner every day. We'll plan it, Bob told her. I don't want you to have to prepare 3 meals a day while you're getting your lesson plans ready to start teaching in 2 short weeks. Do you know when the blackboard will arrive? She shrugged. I really don't. Mr. Peabody said it wasn't something he'd ever ordered before, and it would be here when it was here. I don't think I can start teaching without it though. I'll have to let the parents know next week if it's not here yet. Would you be terribly disappointed if you had to delay the school's opening? Yes, I believe I would be. I've been working toward it, and I feel like I'm ready, now that I've spent so much time talking to Beulah about it. Hopefully everything will fall in line and I can start on the 1st as planned. The lunch special that day was pork chops and baked potatoes. They both ordered it as usual. I am going to do a ham and bean soup for supper tonight if that's all right, Jessie said. Her husband nodded. I haven't had anything that you didn't cook to perfection. You don't even have to ask me. I'll be happy with whatever you make. Are we going to your mother's again tomorrow? I thought we would if you don't mind. Maybe Mother will even let you cook more than she did last week. Jessie grinned. She told me that I could do all the cooking if I wanted. Really? That would be wonderful. Bob's eyes lit up at the idea of not having to eat his mother's cooking. Then that's what I'll do. I do enjoy cooking, and your mother loves it. Most people don't like things they're bad at, and they love things they're good at. You know, I knew a girl at the foundling home who was good at both English and math. She excelled at both, but she didn't like literature at all. She only liked mathematics. She frequently tutored English to children who were math-oriented, because she could speak their language. Interesting. Most people seem to be good at one or the other. Not both. Jessie nodded. That's what I found so fascinating about her. I wish I had a mind that could handle both, even if it preferred one over the other. I can see that. He took a sip of his water. You seem more enthusiastic about teaching after spending yesterday with your friend. I am. I feel like I'm ready to handle the classroom now, in a way I wasn't 2 days ago. Beulah had so much information to share with me. I was really impressed. She shook her head. It's strange, but I always thought her life's goal was teaching. She actually wanted to be a doctor, but as an orphan, she couldn't afford medical school. So she became a teacher instead. Her whole house is full of anatomy books though. Just like your goal is to be a writer, and you're a teacher instead. There's one big difference. Beulah would have been an amazing doctor. I'm not so sure about my writing skills. Bob smiled. I am. You have more confidence in me than I do. She shook her head. I would like to think I could do it. He reached out and grasped both of her hands in his. You can do it. You're an amazing woman, Jessamine Samuels. I truly believe there's nothing you can't do. Jessie looked down at where his thumbs were rubbing the back of her hands. It felt good, but it made her feel strange. I hope that one day I will have that belief in myself. For now, I'll let your beliefs carry me through. Bob watched her for a moment, noting that she didn't try to pull her hands from his. She was no longer trying to kiss him or get close to him, but she wasn't pulling away from him when he touched her either. Only 3 more weeks and his promise to wait a month would be fulfilled. Well, 19 days, he could wait that long. He was sure of it. Once they were back in their small apartment, Jessie looked around, wondering where they would put a child if he ever decided to consummate the marriage and she was to have a baby. As much as she wanted children in the future, she wanted to get through at least the first year of teaching in Texas before she was pregnant. Maybe it was best they weren't consummating after all. To prepare for going to his mother's house the next day, she baked 2 cakes, one for home and one to take with them. She also made 2 loaves of bread. When she was done with her baking, she went into the parlor and sat beside Bob with her lesson plan notebook in front of her. She really wanted to get going on the plans, knowing most of the children would be starting from the very beginning. She'd been working on planning out her first week of school for a little over an hour when she looked up for a moment, thinking about what activity she wanted to do. As soon as she raised her gaze, she felt Bob's eyes on her. She looked at him for a moment, frowning. Why would he stare at her that way when he obviously didn't have feelings for her? Are you getting it figured out? He asked, blushing a little at being caught watching her work. I think so. I won't really know exactly where my students are, or how quickly they'll learn, until school actually starts. It's hard to plan not knowing, but I'm doing my best. I'll have 3 students who already know how to read and write. The others will need to be taught. I know it's going to be challenging. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me to plan much then. Not more than the first week. After that you'll have an idea what to do. Right? Jessie nodded. Right. I probably will need to wait, but after talking to Beulah yesterday, I'm just so eager to get started. Bob frowned. Does it make sense to do a lot of work, though? I don't want you to have to keep redoing the same thing over and over. Probably not. I don't even know if I'll have a blackboard in time. I'm going to go to the Mercantile to check on it on Tuesday. We could head there on our way out of town tomorrow if you'd prefer. That would be wonderful if you don't mind. I want to grab something to cook for lunch as well. He frowned. Mom will have food for you to cook. I was just thinking it would be nice if I could plan what I wanted to make and not rely on what she has on hand. I supposed we could do it either way. He hadn't really thought of having to go into someone else's kitchen and decide what to make from whatever was in the pantry. It did make sense if she bought what she wanted to fix. Well, I'd like to stop if you're willing. She was considering making chicken and dumplings, and she didn't know if Sarah would have the ingredients available. All right. He was game for anything, as long as it was his Jessie cooking and not his mother. Jessie closed her notebook. I think I've really prepared all I can, no matter how much I want to do more. I can create some fun activities to do, but actually planning the school year isn't possible right now. He turned to her on the sofa, smiling. Well, what are you going to do now? She shrugged. I thought I'd go read. Oh. He sounded disappointed, but she had no idea why he would be. Do you have something else in mind? She asked. They'd already had dinner, and it was close to bedtime. I just thought we could spend a little time together. Bob wasn't sure why she was so ready to jump up and leave the room all of a sudden. She'd been doing it a lot, when she used to seek out his company. If you want. She was more than willing to spend time with him if that's what he wanted. It didn't usually seem to be something he cared to do though. Tell me what your 3 wishes would be if you had them. Bob took her hand and pulled her toward him, his arm going around her shoulders. Jessie was startled by the movement, but she settled against him readily. Maybe he was finally wanting to be around her a little more. 3 wishes? She thought hard. The first wish would be that he would fall in love with her, but she really couldn't tell him that. I would wish for unlimited funds so I could take in children who had lost their parents. Just like I was taken in by Wiggy. Tell me about Wiggy. He'd never heard of such a ridiculous name, and he couldn't help but question it. She is a sweet older woman, She lost her husband many years ago, and started the foundling home and school where I've spent the last several years. Wiggy was always kind, and she never turned anyone away. There were children from every background. She called 3 other teachers and me together to tell us she was dying and we had to leave. She offered us grants if we would start schools where no child would be turned away, and we use her modern teaching methods. But we all had to find men who would agree to marry us. She couldn't afford to send us all west and give us the grants. So, we all found husbands through a newspaper. He blinked a couple of times. So you wouldn't have become a mail-order bride if she hadn't coerced you to do so? I wouldn't say she coerced me, but no, I would still be teaching in New York if she hadn't encouraged us all to move west and find husbands. Do you regret it? Would you rather you were still back in New York? I don't think so. I'm excited to start my own school, and it was time for me to do something new. Texas is very different than what I'm used to, but I have a feeling I'm going to love it here. She hadn't mentioned how she felt about marrying him, and that bothered him a bit. Do you regret choosing me to marry? He asked softly. Not at all. I think you and I will get along just fine. She didn't add her misgivings about his feelings for her. Well, I'm happy about that. He sighed. I hope you don't feel as if you were forced into a marriage you didn't want. I don't. I promise you that. Jessie wanted to lean forward and kiss him, but he didn't seem to like it when she was so demonstrative. Let me know what I can do to help you get ready for school to start. I want to be part of your career. I definitely will. For now, I'm just waiting on the blackboard. Can you start without it? He asked. Not really. It would be very difficult to teach without having a place to write down math problems and show students how words are supposed to look. Hopefully everything will go according to plan and we'll be starting school in a week. I hope so, he said skeptically. It was rare that things came in as quickly as the good folks of nowhere needed them when ordered. For some reason, everything seemed to take forever. He'd waited months for a new barber chair. Well, if it doesn't come quickly, then we'll just have to delay school starting. Most of the parents are excited enough that I think someone will make something happen for us. She stood up. I'm going to put my school things away and get ready for bed. I'm sleepy, and I have a lot of cooking to do tomorrow. He grinned. I'm so glad my mother isn't going to cook for us. Do you have any idea how grateful I am to have a Monday without having to pretend the food tastes good? Have you ever considered telling your mother you're surprised her cooking hasn't killed anyone yet? He shook his head. Never. It would hurt her feelings. Jessie did her best not to laugh. He really didn't know his mother at all. When Jessie talked to Mr. Peabody the following morning, he told her that the blackboard was expected on Friday's train into town. He told her it was unusual for things to be late, but it did happen. She purchased the things she needed for lunch that day, and headed back out to the wagon. He said it'll be here Friday. We'll see. Bob couldn't bear to be the one to upset her about the blackboard, but he knew it was unlikely to be there as expected. Just as he was about to drive away, he was stopped by a young man he'd known most of his life. Hello, Francis. Francis waved, his eyes sad. Hello, Mr. Samuels. How are you today? I'm doing good. Have you met my wife, Jessie? Francis shook his head. No, sir. She came here as my mail-order bride. What's a mail-order bride? As Bob explained what a mail-order bride was to young Francis, Jessie watched a pregnant woman struggle with a box full of food. Do you need help? She called. The woman looked startled and shook her head. No, thank you. With those words, she hurried away. Jessie thought nothing more of it as she turned her attention back to the conversation Bob and Francis were having. I wonder if my brother Andy has thought about getting a mail-order bride, Francis said, a faraway look on his face. I don't know. Maybe you should suggest it to him. Or maybe I ought to simply send for the bride myself. Andy never likes any of my suggestions. Bob grinned. Well, you do what you think you should do. I won't tell Andy. That's kind of you. Francis nodded and headed into the mercantile. A friend of yours? Jessie asked. More like an acquaintance. He's a great deal younger than I am. His older brother Andy is more my age. His parents died recently and Andy is trying to raise his younger siblings alone. I agree with Francis. His brother should send for a mail-order bride so he has some help with the children. Sounds like a good idea to me, Jessie said, holding onto the seat as Bob pulled away from the mercantile and headed for his parents' house. What are you planning to make for lunch? Bob asked, his mind already on the food she was going to cook. He hadn't expected a bride who could cook, and he was thrilled with her. He didn't know why he was expecting someone more like his mother. Chicken and dumplings. My dumplings are so light, they practically melt in your mouth. They sound fabulous. I can't wait to try them. Bob flicked the leads to get the horses to move a bit faster. For once he would eat a good lunch on a Monday. Jessie had changed his entire world, and he had no complaints. Chapter 9. Dear Journal, I like Bob's parents more every time I meet them. I did not enjoy the ride home today though. I said some very stupid things that are going to haunt me forever. I actually challenged Bob on the fact that he hasn't made love to me, which makes no sense at all. Why would I do that? I feel like a complete idiot. Hopefully someday the world will open up and swallow me whole. I certainly wished that would happen earlier. Bob and I have yet to discuss the ridiculous things I said. I hope he doesn't hate me forever. Sarah simply moved out of the way when Bob walked into her kitchen, carrying a box of food from the mercantile. Jessie had something in particular she wanted to make, so she bought the ingredients to make sure you had the right thing. Sounds fine to me. Sarah winked at Jessie while Bob wasn't looking. I love to watch my new daughter cook. She's quite adept at it. Maybe you could work together. Bob hoped some of Jessie's skill in the kitchen would wear off on his mother, but you could never tell. I'm going to go find Father. Any idea where he is? I think he said he was mending fences today. I'll go find him, Bob said, kissing Jessie on the cheek as he headed out of the house. He had no desire to watch women cook. Jessie smiled at Sarah. Do whatever you want. I've got lunch. You're the best daughter a woman could ask for. Sarah sank into a chair and picked up a dress she'd been working on sewing. What are we having? Chicken and dumplings. It's my mother's recipe and I love it. I had chicken and dumplings at the diner in town and it wasn't nearly as good. Sounds good to me. Let me know how best to stay out of your way. Jessie laughed. I will. Sarah went back to her sewing and the two women worked happily together, each doing what they enjoyed and did best. As they worked, they chatted about many things. You should have seen Bob when he was little. He loved when it rained. If I didn't catch him, he'd sneak outside and take off all his clothes, dancing in the rain. I think I found him doing that at least a dozen times. His brothers would come to me and tell me he was naked again. Jessie couldn't help but giggle. I hope he stopped that eventually. I don't know. I haven't seen him in a rainstorm for a while, but it wouldn't surprise me. I hope you got a photograph. Sarah laughed. No, the photographer was never around when I needed him. My little brothers would run around naked every chance they got. I found them with no clothes on more times than I could count. I thought you grew up in an orphanage. My parents died when I was 13. Oh, I didn't realize. I'm sorry. I'm sure it was so much harder to have known your parents and lost them. Jessie nodded. So many of the others in the orphanage were left on the doorstep as infants, but I didn't get there until I was 14. They never missed what they didn't have. I missed having parents who loved me every day of my life. I can believe that. You have a family who loves you now. Don't forget that. The minute you married my Bob, you were mine forever. Tears sprang to Jessie's eyes. Thank you. Once the dumplings were ready, Jessie looked at Sarah. How do we let the men know lunch is done? Oh, trust me. They'll be here any minute. My boys know how to follow their stomachs, they always have. Sure enough, the door opened and both men came into the house. lunch ready yet? Bob called out. Yes, I was just asking your mother how to let you know. Oh, I know to come in the house when it's mealtime. Jessie shook her head. Wash your hands, and I'll serve everyone. At that, Sarah got to her feet. You will not. You cooked. I'll serve. Jessie started to protest, but the look on Sarah's face told her not to. Yes, ma'am. Good answer. Sarah grinned as Jessie sat down at the table. The men praised the meal repeatedly, making Jessie smile. It felt good to be appreciated for something she did well. After they were finished, she brought over the cake she'd baked the previous evening. You're spoiling us, Robert said, reaching for the first piece she cut. Are you complaining? Jessie asked. Never. Just commenting. By the time they left that afternoon, Jessie felt that she had cemented her place within the family. Whether Bob ever accepted her as his wife, his parents had accepted her as a daughter. She found she needed that almost as much as she needed him to love her. On the drive home, they talked about how they would switch to going to his parents' house on Sundays, since she was starting school on Monday if at all possible. Mother said they were inviting my brothers and their families on Sunday as well. Do your brothers all have children? He nodded. I have 4 nieces and 3 nephews. I love being an uncle. Do you want children? She asked. She couldn't help but wonder if he ever planned to consummate their marriage, or if they'd go on as they were forever. I do. I'd like half a dozen or so. You do know how children are made, don't you? As soon as she asked the question, she regretted it. She silently prayed he hadn't hurt her. Yes, I know how they're made. Why would you ask me that? Well, if you want children, you have to do something that will make them. I wasn't sure if you understood how they came about, since you've never made any advances in that direction. He frowned. Before you arrived, I promised myself I'd give you a month, before I tried to consummate the marriage. I thought any woman would need that long, before being willing to have relations with a man she'd never met before. So you don't find me unattractive? What would make you think that? Bob was truly baffled by the conversation he found himself having with his wife. He looked at her as if she'd sprung 3 extra heads with a set of horns on each. If you found me attractive, you'd at least be looking for excuses to kiss me. I would? Bob shook his head. Every time I start kissing you, I don't want to stop. It's better if I just don't start until the month is up. I never asked for a month, she said softly. She wasn't sure why she was pushing him so hard, but it felt very odd to be married to a man for more than a week, and sharing his bed every night, without anything more between them than sleep. He didn't even know what to say to that. She was right. She hadn't asked for a month or any period of time at all. The first day she was there, he'd felt some trepidation on her part, but since then, she'd seemed willing, if not eager. Maybe it was time he tried to do more than just lie beside her in the dark at night. As she made supper that evening, Jessie was furious with herself for speaking her mind in the wagon on the way home. How could she have embarrassed herself and Bob that way? What must he think of her? She could barely look him in the eye as they ate their supper, and wanted to climb under the table and hide in shame. When he washed the dishes as he had every other night she had cooked, she didn't say a word, wanting to go into their room and hide as soon as the dishes were done. She would read her book and forget that she was an idiot, if she could. As soon as she set the towel down after putting the last dish away, Jessie turned to run to their room where she could be alone and not feel so terrible about what she'd said. Instead, he caught her wrist, pulling her into the parlor with him and down onto the sofa. I've been thinking about what you said in the wagon. She swallowed hard, not even wanting to respond to that. You have? I have. I hate that I've made you feel like I don't think you're attractive. As soon as you got off the train, I thought you must be the wrong person, because no woman as beautiful as you would agree to be a mail-order bride. Really? You didn't look at me and want to send me back to New York on the next train? I didn't. I wanted to kiss you and make love with you the instant I saw you. But I was sure you wouldn't be attracted to me. I thought you'd need at least a month to get used to being married before you would feel comfortable doing anything other than sleeping beside me platonically. She took a deep breath. I wasn't initially attracted to you, but the more I've gotten to know you, the more attractive you've become to me. Really? She nodded. I haven't been able to figure out why you rarely even kiss me. I thought that you regretted marrying me. I don't regret it at all. Sending for you was the smartest thing I've ever done. He took her hand and brought it to his lips, kissing it softly. And I'll go back on the promise I made to myself if it will make you happy. She sighed. That's the thing. I don't think just one of us should be made happy by consummating the marriage. I'd never ask you to do anything against your morals. Against my morals? Well, I feel as if I'd be doing something wrong by asking you to make love with me. So I won't. Bob felt strangely let down. She obviously was backing off on what she'd said in the wagon. If she had no desire to make love, then he certainly wasn't going to force her. Then we'll wait the month like I first said. She nodded, annoyed with him. Why couldn't he see he was making a mistake? I'll go read then. He watched her leave, irritated with her. And himself. Mostly with himself. He should have just taken her into his arms and kissed her. If she was as willing as she claimed, they could be in bed now, and the frustration of the past week would be over. But no. He had to take the high road and act as if he knew what was best for both of them. Jessie went into their bedroom and picked up her book, feeling an overwhelming rush of sadness. Why was she never good enough? Even after she'd been so bold, Bob didn't want her. School. She had to concentrate on her school and teaching. On Friday morning, Jessie went to the mercantile to see if the blackboard was in, and she was pleasantly surprised to hear that it was. Bob had made her feel that it would never be there, and she was thrilled to be able to start school on time. Mr. Peabody promised that it would be hanging by early afternoon, and she hurried home to finish up the curtains. She hated sewing so much that she'd put off the task as often as she possibly could. At lunch, she excitedly told Bob about the blackboard being in, so you can start school Monday as planned. Bob grinned at her, almost as excited as she was. Yes. I'm going to finish the curtains, and I'll go up to the church as soon as they're done, to hang them properly. The blackboard is supposed to be up by the time I get there. I'm happy for you. I'm happy for the entire town. Jessie practically danced down the street on their way home from the diner. I'm so excited to be able to teach the children here. Just don't forget to write, he said softly. He worried that she would become so engrossed in teaching that she would forget her first, and to his mind, most important, dream. She looked at him for a moment before nodding. I won't. But my writing is for me. Teaching is for the whole town. That's true. He didn't tell her his plans to send off any manuscript she finished, because he was afraid she would hide them from him. He knew she was worried about being rejected, again. But I'll continue penning my stories, and I plan to teach creative writing to my advanced students. I'm actually very excited about that. I want my students to understand the joy of the written word. With you as a teacher, there's no doubt in my mind they will understand and cherish literature. You're the best thing that ever happened to this town. She scoffed. I'm no more important than the local barber. You keep men from looking like grizzly bears. He laughed. Well, I guess that's true, but I don't teach them to read. I saw that man you told me about the other day. The one who lives in the woods. He has a long beard. What did you say his name is? Cletus. I don't know his last name. I'm not sure anyone does. He's been there for years. People say he lost his mind in the war between the states. Jessie shook her head. I feel like someone should at least go talk to him and make sure he has enough food and a warm place to stay. He'll be fine. Bob didn't want her to seek out any other man, let alone one who lived in the woods. All right. They had reached the barber shop. Have a good afternoon. I'm not sure if I'll find time to make supper, so we might be stopping by the diner. He frowned. Do you know I've gotten so used to your cooking, I don't even like going to the diner anymore? She grinned. Glad to hear it. We still might have to go tonight, but I'll try to make it home in time to cook supper. As soon as he was gone, Jessie hurried upstairs and put the last few stitches into the curtains. She'd been told the pastor and his wife would help her hang them when she arrived, so Jessie folded them up and tucked them under her arm, hurrying out the door toward the church. She was excited to be able to get the last things ready for school to start Monday. It was going to be glorious, teaching all the children of nowhere how to read and write. Oh, and do math. She'd have to do that as well. When she got to the church, the men were still hanging the blackboard, so she sat in the front pew and watched. The pastor and his wife were both there, and they had a curtain rod lying on the floor in front of them. Mrs. Johnson came to sit beside her, clapping her hands. "I'm so excited to have a school in town. This is going to change so many things around here." "For the good, I hope," Jessie replied with a smile. "Of course for the good. I know many of the mothers try to teach their children, but a lot of them are illiterate too, so there's no point. They do well if they can teach them how to count to 10. I know I have my work cut out for me, but I'm so excited. Teaching is my second favorite thing in the whole world." "What's your favorite thing?" Mrs. Johnson looked genuinely curious. "I enjoy writing. I always have. I once thought I'd be a famous novelist, but I just don't have the courage to share my stories, so I keep them tucked away." Jessie shrugged. "I'll have to be content to teach the students how to write creatively and hope one of them becomes a famous author. I don't think you should give up on your dream. Keep writing. Someday you'll feel like you can share something. I just know it. Maybe someday. We'll see." Finally the men were finished hanging the blackboard, and Jessie got to her feet, holding up the purple curtains for the pastor to see. "What do you think?" "I think they'll look fine covering the blackboard every Sunday." Pastor Johnson rubbed his hands together. "Let's get them hung up, and then you can do whatever else you want to do to get ready for Monday. I know the people in town are excited for us to finally have a school." The three of them worked together throughout the afternoon, hanging the curtains and making sure everything was ready for class to start on Monday. It was almost 5 when they finished, and Jessie hurried home. She wanted to be able to fix something for supper, but she had nothing in mind. She'd look through their food and figure something out if it was possible. By the time Bob was home from work, Jessie had meat pies made up. They weren't perfect, but they were food. He walked into the kitchen and sniffed. "Something smells wonderful. Meat pies. They'll be ready in about 15 minutes. How was your afternoon?" Jessie set the table as she asked. "It was good. Lots of haircuts. I think every young boy in town was in today to get his hair cut for school." Jessie smiled, pleased that the parents were taking the classes seriously. "Wonderful. I can't wait to see them all on Monday morning." Most of them seemed to be excited for school to start. "They were asking me about you and if you'd be a strict teacher. One boy asked if you had a ruler ready to rap his knuckles with, because he knows he'll be getting into trouble." She laughed. "I rarely rap knuckles, but I will if I absolutely have to. It's easier to talk to parents than use corporal punishment." She wiped off the counter and cleaned everything up as much as she could while she waited for the meat pies to finish cooking. "I'm sure Philip will be pleased to hear that. He's heard stories of teachers who rap knuckles apparently, and he's worried his will never be the same." Bob grinned at her as she fluttered around the kitchen, getting everything ready. He couldn't help but wonder if she would be this rushed every evening. How much would change when she started teaching? "I hope you're hungry," she said. "This is one of my favorite meals to make. It smells wonderful, so I'm sure I'll love it. Remember, even the worst thing you cook is a million times better than the best thing my mother cooks." "That's very true. I hope it will always stay that way. If it doesn't, I might have to run away." He winked at her as he took his seat at the table. He was ready to eat. Chapter 10. Dear Journal, I get to start teaching school today. The blackboard was up on Friday, and everything is ready. I'm nervous and excited all at once. You'd think this was my first time in front of a classroom. It will be my first time teaching arithmetic and history, and God forbid, science. I hope I won't be an utter failure at those subjects. I know I'll do well with reading and writing. Today will challenge me and show me what I'm made of. It can't do anything but, can it? Jessamine was at the church 30 minutes early on Monday morning. When it was time for school to start, she went to the door and called her students in, pleased to finally meet them. As the children filed into the classroom, she asked for his or her name, and made a mark next to their name on her list of students. She told each child where to sit before going to the front of the room. She wrote her name on the board, realizing it was the first time she was calling herself Mrs. Samuels instead of Miss Stewart. She carefully explained her classroom rules, telling the students they must ask permission to use the outhouse and there could be no talking while she was talking. When she had finished with the rules, she had every student stand and introduce him or herself and tell how much schooling they'd had, if any. As she made notes next to each name, she was pleased that what she'd expected after meeting with the parents seemed to be the same as what the children were telling her. The morning flew by as she worked on teaching them all the alphabet, and how to count and do simple arithmetic. She read aloud from Little Women, a favorite of hers, trying to show the children the world that would be opened up to them when they could read for themselves. She excused her students for lunch at noon, and put her head down on her desk. It had been a good morning, but an exhausting one. She heard a throat clear and looked up to see Bob standing in front of her. He held 2 plates full of food. "What's this?" "I brought a sandwich." "I didn't think a sandwich would be enough for the first day of school." "You look tired already, and it's only lunchtime." Jessie smiled. "That's true. I am weary, but I'm hungry. Are you eating with me?" She knew he'd gone to the diner, and was thankful he'd thought of her. "Of course. If the teacher says I may, that is." "The teacher is thrilled for the company." He put both plates on the table, and she reached for one of them. "How is it going so far? Are the children behaving? Have you wrapped Philip's knuckles yet?" "Not yet. He's actually been very well behaved. All the children have been." She took a bite of the meatloaf and sighed. "It went exceptionally well. We worked on the alphabet and a little simple arithmetic. I'll do some history this afternoon." "Good." The children looked happy. Bob was thrilled that her first day was going so well. "They seem to be. And I'm enjoying the challenge of teaching so many at different levels. I'll get used to it soon and it will be a breeze." Jessie looked around at the empty desks in the room. "I want them all to love learning." "They will. Because you love teaching. A good teacher will make most children love learning. There'll be 1 or 2 who don't, but you'll be surprised how many will." Bob finished his meal. "I'm going to head back home. I just wanted to check on the teacher." "Thank you. I appreciate you bringing me lunch." "It was no problem." Bob took both plates to carry them back to the diner. They didn't usually allow their dishes to be taken out of the restaurant, but Bob had been their best customer for years. After dropping the plates off, he headed home. He didn't know what she planned to make for supper, but he would get any cleaning done so she wouldn't have to think about it when she got home. As he was straightening a couple of things in their bedroom, her journal fell open. He didn't mean to read it, but he couldn't seem to help himself. In the journal, he saw his name and the fact that she'd acted like an utter idiot. He flipped back to the first page and began reading, even though he knew it was a mistake. These were her private thoughts, and he had no business even thinking about reading it. But read he did. All the way through to the entry that morning where she talked about being nervous about her new school. He closed the journal and traced her name on the cover. Jessamine. He had long since stopped thinking of her that way and begun seeing her as Jessie. Jessamine was a woman who was completely out of his reach. A girl coming across the country on a train to meet him. Jessie was his beautiful wife, who cooked him wonderful meals and treated him with nothing but respect. Jessie was the woman he loved. When Jessie got home from school that afternoon, she was ready to collapse. She'd enjoyed the day, but it had been absolutely exhausting. It had seemed to last a week as she learned the names of her new students and taught them each to write their own names. That had been her first day's goal, to have them all writing their names, and it had been accomplished. She immediately went to the kitchen to start a stew for supper. She had all of the carrots chopped up and the meat cut up. She only had to start it all cooking, and peel and dice the carrots. Once the stew was on the stove, she looked around the apartment, checking to see where Bob was, but he was nowhere in sight. She was actually pleased, because she could take a quick nap. She knew the first day of school was always the most tiring for her. She wouldn't need a nap every day, but that day she did. And since Bob wasn't around, she was going to take it. Yawning, she slipped under the covers, fully dressed. She would be up again soon to cook, so it didn't matter if she kept her clothes on. Bob rushed down Main Street, hurrying toward Adam Roberts' house. Adam Roberts was a botanist who spent most of his time in the greenhouse he'd built in his backyard. When Bob reached the other man's home, he knocked and waited for a moment. There was no answer, as he'd expected, so he immediately went around back to the greenhouse, finding the man there, puttering in his workspace. Adam looked up at him with a smile. "Bob, what are you doing here? I was hoping you had some flowers that I could buy from you. I want to make a grand gesture with my wife tonight, and flowers would be a huge help." Adam smiled. "I have some violets back here. The roses aren't blooming yet, so I wouldn't recommend those. Violets would be fine. How much?" Adam stared at the younger man for a moment before nodding. "I'm done studying these particular specimens. You may have them at no charge. It will make room for the lilacs I'm wanting to start here." Bob frowned. "I'm happy to pay you." "No need. You're truly doing me a favor." "All right." Bob waited as the other man carefully cut off the flowers and bound the stems together. "You'll want to put them in water when you get home. They'll stay fresh longer that way." Bob accepted the flowers and nodded. "Thank you so much. Your next haircut is on the house." "That I'll take." "Sounds like a fair exchange to me, thanks again." Bob hurried out of the greenhouse and toward the mercantile. He needed something to go with the flowers. At the mercantile, he looked in the glass case at the front of the store, quickly spotting what he was looking for. He pointed and Mr. Peabody smiled and boxed up his purchase. "Thank you." He rushed out again, toward the apartment, noting that it was well past 5. Jessie should be home and supper should be almost ready. His sweet wife was sure to make him supper, even though she was clearly exhausted. When he walked into the apartment, he immediately caught a whiff of the stew that was on the stove. It already smelled delicious, but he had no idea where his wife was. He began searching the few rooms of their home, finding her in their bed, sound asleep. She was curled on her side and her palm was under her cheek. He sat down on the edge of the bed right beside her and softly said her name. Jessie came awake slowly, blinking rapidly. "Bob?" "Hi." He thrust the flowers toward her. "These are for you." She sat up in bed, not sure why he was giving her flowers, but she loved them. "Thank you. They're lovely." He then handed her a long flat box. "I saw this, and it reminded me of you." She opened the box and found a pearl necklace. She'd never owned any type of jewelry, and this stunned her. She stroked a finger over one of the pearls. "What's the occasion? Do I need an occasion to give my beautiful wife gifts?" Jessie frowned. "I suppose not, but you've never done anything like this before. Call them the first day of school gifts." "All right." She still wasn't sure what he was doing, but she would happily take the nice things he'd brought her. "How was your afternoon?" he asked softly, his palm against her cheek. "It was good. Busy. Before we left for the day, every student in class could write his or her own name. I wasn't sure we'd accomplish it, but it was my goal for the day." The smile she gave him was that of sheer joy. "Good job. I'm proud of you." "Thank you." She hid a yawn behind her hand. "I need to get up and check on supper." "I hope you're hungry." "I'm always hungry," Bob responded. Jessie smiled. "I think that's true." She waited until he stood before she slid from the bed, surprised when he caught her by the waist and kissed her. The kiss was anything but platonic. He had never kissed her quite that way before. Bob watched her as she walked from the room, the flowers in one hand and the pearls in the other. He followed Jessie into the kitchen, where she put the flowers in a glass filled with water before heading for the stew. She tasted it and added some seasoning. When she tasted it again, she smiled. "It's ready." She carefully cut bread off a loaf and carried butter to the table to go with it. Then she served them each a bowl of the stew. While they ate, she noticed he was watching her with a slightly goofy smile on his face. What had gotten into the man? They did the dishes together as usual, and afterward he caught her hand. She expected him to pull her into the parlor, but instead he led her into their bedroom. "What are we doing here?" Bob kissed her sweetly. "I'm about to have relations with the woman I love with all my heart. Is that all right with you?" She stared at him for a moment, surprised by his words. He'd never said anything about love before, and he'd planned to wait a month. They had another week and a half to go. "Love?" He nodded, leading her to the foot of the bed and sitting beside her. "I never meant to make you feel inadequate. I thought I was being a good, considerate husband by giving you a month before we made love. I realize now what a huge mistake I've made, and I want to make it up to you. I really don't understand." He closed his eyes for a minute, realizing he needed to confess. "I was cleaning while you were teaching today, trying to make your life easier." "I appreciate that." Why was he telling her this? "I picked up your journal, and was just going to move it, but I dropped it, and it fell open, and my name was on the page, and I read it. Every single page of it. I know I shouldn't have, but it helped me understand you so much better. Will you forgive me?" Jessie thought about everything she had written about him in her journal, and she felt her face grow hot. "You read it all?" He nodded. "I should have closed it as soon as I saw it lying open, but I didn't." She shook her head. "So now you're trying to make me feel better by pretending you have feelings for me?" "No. I'm being honest about how I feel, because I now know you're ready to hear it." He cupped her face in his hands and kissed her deeply. "I would never reject you, Jessamine. You are the woman I prayed would come to me, and so much more. I expected to have an ugly woman step off the train. I never dreamed a mail-order bride could look half as beautiful as you do." She sighed. "I would rather you not read my journal again." She was still having a hard time wrapping her mind around what was happening. "I won't. I promise. I'll even make you a box with a lock on it, and then you can keep the key with you. I'll never be able to read it." "That's not necessary. Your word is enough." She looked down at her hands, which were pressed against his chest. "Bob, I'm sure you've guessed after reading my journal, but I love you too. I wish I'd been able to tell you without you already knowing, but it didn't work out that way. Hearing you say it means so much more than reading about your feelings. I'm sorry I made you doubt yourself and feel bad about that." She shook her head. "I think I've been rejected so much that I've learned to expect the next rejection. I'm glad you're not telling me to go away. On the contrary. I'm begging you to stay and make me the happiest man alive." She leaned toward him and kissed him. "I can do that." Epilogue. Dear Journal, it's been a year since I came to Nowhere, Texas, and I couldn't be happier. Bob is so kind and wonderful to me that I'm not sure how to be good enough to deserve him. Our first child is due any day now, and I'm hoping it's a little boy. We need a little Bob running around here. Or a Roberta. I'd take a Roberta too. Frankly, any child, as long as he or she belongs to Bob and me, is very welcome. Beulah is expecting her second son already. It's surprising that everything her new husband told her has come true so far. She is having sons at an alarming rate. She said it has something to do with the McLean legacy, whatever that means. I got a letter from Wiggy today. She's doing well, thank heavens. I really expected her to be gone by now, but she seems to be hanging on strong. That pleases me. I don't know how much longer she has, but I treasure every letter she sends. She made the right decision sending us all away to find husbands. I truly am happy." Jessie looked up from her journal when she heard the door close. Bob came into the parlor where she was sitting with her feet up. It was Saturday and he'd worked all day while she'd been at home grading papers. "How are you feeling?" he asked. It was the same thing he asked every time he saw her. He watched her as if he expected her to explode like a stick of dynamite. It hadn't yet happened, and she was pleased to be able to say that. "I'm fine. You know, women have been having babies for thousands of years, and I'm just another. No woman has ever had my baby before." She smiled. "I'm doing good, Papa. Worry about something else." "Well, I have something to tell you, but it's not a worry." He handed her a piece of folded paper, and she carefully unfolded it, wondering what it could be. "Dear Mrs. Samuels, we're happy to say that your manuscript titled Journey to Nowhere has been accepted for publication." She looked up from the paper. "How did they get my manuscript?" Bob shrugged. "I may have sent it to them." "Does that bother you?" Jessie frowned. "I wish I'd known. I figured if they rejected you, you would never have to know. If they didn't reject you, then you could be happy when you found out they loved it." "So can you be happy?" She shook her head. "Sometimes I just don't know what to do with you, Bob Samuels. Love me. That's all I ask." She leaned forward and brushed her lips against his. "I can do that."